Right, Hangout is live. Hi guys, it is Kristi, and welcome to a Hangout that was initially sort of inspired by a really badly done video by Armored Skeptic on postmodernism.
Oh, I'm on your
And
notification squad, Kristi.
all right,
Sorry.
so yeah, um, right. So what was my flow? I lost my flow now. Right. So yes, we had this discussion with some people about the concept, and there are people who have a lot more knowledge on this topic than I do as a social scientist who specialized in quantitative methods. I did a lot with statistics, but postmodernism definitely falls more on the philosophy side of the humanities. And so we're going to have a discussion with somebody who knows more than me and has actually done quite a lot of preparation for this hangout. So I'm really excited to see what we're going to be hearing. And I'm also joined not only by Alex, who's going to start us off, but also by the American Anarchist. So yeah, Alex, do you want to start at the beginning and let us know how you go?
Certainly. So just full disclosure, I procrastinated when it came to taking notes for this. I was like, yeah, I'll go ahead and make notes for this because there are things that I'm aware of, but I didn't start until about like 3 hours ago, and then I just nonstop typed. So this is going to be a bit of a mess. It's not edited. But I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot. The thing that I'm most interested in when it comes to postmodernism, aside from the fact that most people don't really understand what it is, which is actually entirely understandable, and I'll get into that in a second, is the history of it. Because most people start in around the 1960s, 1970s, because around I think it was 1979, was when it was first coined as a word, and it was first explained what it actually is supposed to refer to. But precursors to postmodernist thought have been going on since the late 1700s. So majoritively, as far as philosophers are concerned, as far as academia is concerned, postmodernism is not something that is definable discretely. That is considered a bit of a truism among philosophers. It's just simply a methodology, as was somewhat formulated later on by other postmodernist thinkers. And something else to bear in mind is that most postmodernist thinkers don't actually call themselves postmodernists because it's not a philosophy, it's a methodology, as I just said. I'm repeating myself. Yay! That's a great start. So, well, we should probably start off with Immanuel Kant. So back in, I think it was 1779, Kant came up with this concept of the Copernican revolution. This was an assumption that we cannot know things in and of themselves, and that objects of knowledge have to conform to our faculties of representation. So things like God, freedom, immortality, the world at large, first beginning, final end, these are concepts which have what is known as regulative function, which is the idea that we know what they're supposed to be. We know the words that are meant to represent what those things are, but we cannot experience these things, or at least we cannot know that we are experiencing these things. And as such, it's not something that we can say that we have actual firsthand knowledge of.
That could be, let's say, just compared to like the concept of a chair, which you can sit in and you can agree on sort of what a chair is. But when it comes to freedom, that's a much more amorphous, abstract concept. We can agree sort of broadly on the definitions, but you can't directly experience freedom as a concept the way you could chair.
Correct.
Is that sort of what you're talking about?
That's basically exactly right, yes.
I'm playing the curious student here, asking expansion questions and clarification questions. So if I interrupt,
That's
it's
good.
usually to do that. Yeah.
That is a good thing. So that's basically the major contribution that Kant has made unintentionally towards postmodernism. Postmodernism itself was not something that people were trying to go towards. This is just something that eventually naturally came about as a result of a lot of different pre-postmodernist thought. This Copernican revolution was sort of expanded upon by Hegel about let's say about 40 years later. In his dialectics, specifically in the book Phenomenology of Spirit, he used the word sense certainty, which he described as our immediate ability to experience things, and that our immediate ability to experience things is extremely limited. At least that's what he was explaining and what he was postulating. We cannot be certain of our of things in general, because we ourselves, via our senses, don't have the ability to simply, quote unquote, experience things immediately as they happen. We have a delay in our minds. Our minds necessarily filter what it is that we are experiencing. So the idea that we are objectively experiencing any one event is a little misleading. At least,
right. So would this be like sort of a naive empiricism that you say, oh, I see the world exactly as it exists and my perception of it is 100% accurate. Whereas, as we're going to see with postmodernism, we have concepts that we need to understand the world and other ways of experiencing it, not just a direct, unfiltered experience. That there are things that mediate the world as it is, as you say, to quote Kant, and then how our brains perceive that and understand it as sensory information. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Absolutely. That is 100% on the nose. So, Hegel at the time, when he made his dialectics, that was him attempting, well, partially, that was him attempting to define a fully realized concept of what an experience is, so that we can actually come up with the idea of how it is that we experience things. And, there's been a lot of responses to him. A lot of people think that he didn't take into account a variety of different things, especially the foundations of his dialectics that need to be explained non-dialectically. But I'm not going to get into any of that because that's not entirely relevant. And it's also a huge other thing. So from Hegel, we then move on to Kierkegaard around the same time. So Kierkegaard comes up with another concept that starts to influence the growth of postmodernist thought, wherein he describes modern society as not being a bunch of individuals who are simply making up a society with their own individual thoughts and feelings, but that modern society is a network of relations where individuals kind of coagulate into this amorphous concept that we call the public. And he postulated that in modern society, because it is so large at that point in comparison to societies hundreds of years past, it's mostly held together by what he identified as the press, specifically, for better or for worse. And when the press presents what is happening to the world or to society, that is the only way in which the public can actually be aware of what is happening at large. To be a part of society essentially means that you need to remain in the loop. And if you don't remain in the loop, if you don't listen to the press, or at the very least at the time, if that was your only access to outside information and you didn't pay attention to it, you may as well have been a hermit, for all that your thought contributed to society. And experience-wise and knowledge-wise, it was extremely limited to not experience the press, and it would hinder the public, as the concept exists, to not pay attention to what is happening. So the invention of the press and the value of the free press became major cornerstones to the growth of society and societal thought in the form of the public, at least to Kierkegaard. So the press just sort of held together society, or societal thought, as an artificial medium. Now, I don't think he would have possibly ever imagined that we would get to the point that we are right now, where we have the internet as being a thing that holds society together, even at a much larger extent. But I think you can probably apply this sort of method of analysis to many internet communities, because you can find that we are somewhat distinct from each other in some ways. Some people obviously participate in multiple communities, but there are other communities that are so diametrically opposed to other communities that they would be separated from each other. There's a distinction. And so you can sort of identify either the forums or the YouTube channels that are frequented, or the blogs, whatever it is that these people get their information from, that is what holds that community together, intellectually speaking. So we sort of naturally culminate towards whatever information is being given to the community that we choose to participate in, and we all then become the public in our opinions. That doesn't mean that we become the same, because obviously even at the time, the public was something that had people necessarily disagreeing with each other. Just because something was being presented as being a thing that happened at the time does not mean that everybody agreed on the interpretation of how we should take whatever the event was. That's something that Kierkegaard noted as being something that possibly couldn't even be solved. The idea that people are just automatically going to see and interpret matter-of-factual happenings differently from each other. Any questions for that?
No, I was going to just make some links to, like say the use of state propaganda in places like North Korea to limit the discourse and the notions of what can be discussed within that society would be an example of that on like a more practical or pernicious level.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, the fact that it is such a huge thing that ties people together means that it's extremely influential towards everybody's thought. And so having a controlled press is an extremely easy way to control the public, as it were. And again, this is something that was come up back in 1846, something along those lines. So this is before 1984. This is before any of the Orwellian things that we know of now that commented on this. So it was a pretty good hypothesis at the time that has definitely stood the test of time. Where did I put my notes? Oh no. Okay. So next up on the sort of progress towards postmodernism is Karl Marx. Yes, Marx was involved somewhat in the progression towards postmodernism, but he was only one contributor.
Evil Marx.
Not evil Marx, no. But he was only one contributor, and his contributions were kind of minor in comparison to others. But Marx's sort of contribution is when he pointed out that society seems to fetishize commodities, and that the value of said commodities seem to fluctuate independent of what he referred to as its corporeal being, or its actual value, as stated by his labor theory of value. And he said, so when workers begin to realize that commodities are just a product of their labor, paradoxically, through realizing their place in society and who they are, they then lose who they are and sort of de-res from society, which eventually will result in workers becoming displaced and not being satisfied with their lives and eventually uniting against the proletariat and all that stuff. But that's another conversation entirely. So then from there, we get to Nietzsche, who is Nietzsche.
That's always my favorite part, is Nietzsche.
He is arguably the biggest contributor towards postmodernist thought, which is kind of funny because many of the people who out of hand dismiss postmodernism in general tend to be pretty big fans of Nietzsche. So it's a little weird. Nietzsche regularly in his writings would talk about a disillusion of the distinction between the real world and the apparent world. He would go back to Plato's writings. Plato and Platonism would establish that apparent truths and things in which we perceive as being real are irrelevant and just throw those away. And what Plato attempted to do was establish that there is one objective, quote unquote, true world, and that is the only thing that held any sort of truth, irrespective of our perspectives. And Nietzsche's kind of regarded this true world, quote unquote, as simply being another way of saying real world. So he felt that the establishment of a true world that's supposed to subsume the apparent world is kind of superfluous. So in that sense, he rejected the true world as being superfluous. So that got rid of the real world, quote unquote, in his words. And since it already got rid of the quote unquote apparent world, now we don't have either. So his idea was that what the truth of the world is somewhere in between the two. And many would postulate that what that would mean is perhaps some sort of virtual world that we all cohabitate in. And postmodern thought has sort of drilled that down into making the concept that reality is just necessarily a quote unquote filtered perspective for any one individual, no matter what. We're all participating in the world, but we aren't necessarily what make up the world, in a sort of simplified sense, I guess. Before I move on, anything there?
Nope. Please continue. Unless anyone else has any questions that they want on Nietzsche before Alex continues. Okay. All right, keep going.
All right. So moving on to another thing that Nietzsche participated in. He was also responsible very much for the current postmodernist art and aesthetics movement. In his very first book, The Birth of Tragedy, he drew parallels to Greek tragedy and the current, at the time, sort of synthesis of logic, reason, science, modernism, as it were. And when he analyzed Greek tragedy, he put together that there were two main forces that made it appealing as well as made it capable of growing and advancing. And the two main forces were represented by the gods Apollo and Dionysus. Apollo sort of represented the natural beauty of things which are the way they are, and definitely stressed the virtue of knowing what is. Whereas Dionysus was the essence of frenzy and intoxication, as he put it, wherein we can take what is and we can create fiction from it, or we can create something even grander artificially. It's not necessarily what is, and we're taking a beauty and we're turning it into something else, but he felt that that was very much necessary in order for growth to occur. And at the time, Nietzsche looked at science and logic in the way in which it was currently being done, and he saw it as frozen and lifeless. And he felt that it was frozen and lifeless because it was purely Apollonian in the way in which it works. That Dionysian frenzy or intoxication was divorced from it entirely. He hypothesized anyway that in order to save society from becoming stale, lifeless, and nihilistic, as he put it, he proposed that we need to go back and find that Dionysian frenzy and inject it into our interpretation of reality alongside the Apollonian. In a similar sense, if I want to simplify this a little bit, ContraPoints actually made a similar point not too terribly long ago when she discussed that there is this valid idea that many of the people who focus purely on the quote unquote academic lack a sort of quote unquote fun or cool factor that appeals to society, a necessary appeal if you actually want to have the intersubjective experience of quote unquote the public swing the pendulum to your side. You need to be appealing in the current way in which thoughts tend to transmit if you want society to accept what you're doing. Now, and this is a side note for me, I think that Nietzsche was a little bit too cynical about the attraction that people have to the Dionysian side of things. He saw this whole progression that we were having in logic and science to being this just deadened society that could not derive any morals from merely what is, that didn't have any direction other than to just keep going forward technologically, and that this was not going to be sufficient for anybody's existential needs. But I think he really underestimated how naturally driven human beings are towards not necessarily knowledge, but the fulfillment of our existential needs, which I believe is what he was referring to with his Dionysian frenzy and intoxication. We see that very much today. And again, this mainly goes towards YouTube communities, wherein knowledge is kind of secondary. Being able to entertain is the main thing that's going to get you attention and an audience and people listening to you. The knowledge part is not necessary, as I think many people would probably agree, at least as far as the way things work right now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just my thing, is that I think that he was very, he underestimated our sort of need for entertainment value over knowledge. Though I don't know too well what was going on at the time that made him think that we were just going to sink into this cold, lifeless, logic and science only universe. Though I guess that is what some people claim to want these days. Though I don't think anybody actually does.
Well, we get back to the public and the communications you consume. But yes, moving on, because we're going to, Go ahead.
So in his book On Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense, we then get to this, we get to his work that says that okay, let me rephrase. In that book, it's a work of his that gives us his perspective on the necessary limits, as he saw it, of science and scientific investigation and the establishment of fact and theory, wherein he characterized science and the way in which it establishes these things as being a long series of metaphors that harden into truth over time. Now, I don't know how to necessarily explain this in layman's terms, but I'm going to use a quote that because the quote itself is something I can't really break down too fundamentally. But the quote is, "On this account, metaphor begins when a nerve stimulus is copied as an image, which is then imitated in sound, giving rise, when repeated, to the word, which becomes a concept when the word is used to designate multiple instances of singular events." That's the quote. Now, from this, he drew that when we have a conceptual image that's given to us through science, it necessarily equates more than two different things as being the same thing, and are thus, to some extent, not actually true. This feeds into the sort of postmodern analysis method that says that because there are multiple ways to approach the question of what is true, you will come away with different answers. And science seeks to come up with one singular one that could apply to multiple perspectives. But in doing so, it comes up with one that explains multiple things at once. And if science is saying that multiple things at once are actually the same thing, even though they're different things, then to some extent it must be false. That's anyway what he said. If you guys want a better explanation, you can go read On Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense yourself. Though I will say Nietzsche is notoriously difficult to understand because he wrote that way intentionally because he didn't care if people understood him. He's a very odd man.
I think if people maybe go back and listen to that 2 or 3 times,
yeah,
they might get it, because I followed along but I don't ask me to explain it.
Yeah. So that's another contribution that he made. Here's another one. In The Gay Science and Thus Spoke Zarathustra, we get an idea what postmodernists interpret as this result of the loss of distinction of the real and apparent worlds, as I mentioned before, i.e. that the endless repetition of events historically are based on non-historic events. The past does not actually repeat itself per se, more that quote unquote new events happen and other events happen that are similar but also quote unquote new. Repetition then of the past is a matter of difference instead of identity. On the usage and on the uses and disadvantages of history for life, another book that he wrote, Nietzsche proposes that the repetition of the past is an inevitability, that society and the individual are both extently contingent upon the repetition of these quote unquote different events. The idea here is that human nature is finite and that what we tend towards is always going to be the same. We all want basically the same thing throughout time. The problem is we require a development of thought, of technology, of the ability to reach these things. And it's a trial and error thing as to how we're going to get to this utopic society that we all want. Which can lead to very terrible things, but that this is all just new ways that we've figured out how to screw up, and eventually we'll get to that point where we've actually figured out what we need to figure out. That's one interpretation of what he was saying that postmodernists tend to go with, but like I said, he's extremely difficult to understand. So that might not necessarily be what he said. That's just what postmodernists take away from it. I think that's the end of the Nietzsche part of it.
Okay.
Anybody have any questions?
Anyone want to jump in? Just give us a preview. What do you still have to cover, just so we have a sense for time?
Not too terribly much. Martin Heidegger, and a bit like a slight bit of Derrida, and then we get to the actual culmination of the coining of the phrase postmodernism.
Okay, yeah, but no Wittgenstein or anything. Okay, we're not going that way. All right, cool. Then yeah, I think nobody's jumped in, so maybe we'll just keep going. We'll plow through and get to the end of it, and then I'll throw it over next to Gwen, because Gwen did a great video on this and would really love to hear some responses. So yeah, let's go through. Keep going.
Okay, so Martin Heidegger was very much influenced by Nietzsche's work and mediated on it, meditated on it, thought about it a lot, and regularly would ruminate on his work. He even referred to Nietzsche as the death of Western metaphysics. As he claimed, Western metaphysics, according to Heidegger, was essentially this inevitable trending towards the development of technology so that we can be in the presence of what is called realized beings, given Nietzsche's work. And the realized being is just a person who has come to fully understand who they themselves are in the place of the universe, and that we all wish to be a part of other people who are that, essentially. Now, Heidegger bemoans that we're all trending towards a metaphysic where people are no longer actually people, and that science is no longer science, and that all of this is just merely an ends into in and of themselves to establishing being as being a part of society, as opposed to and being in other people's presence. Being and fully realizing it, to Heidegger, is not the emergence from being anymore, but the emerging and passing away of beings within and among other beings. This sort of fear that we're tending towards an ultimate collectivism as opposed to fully realizing individualistic tendencies. So postmodernists do tend to accept Heidegger's reflection on being and what realization and derealization are of beings through the enframing of the growth of technology. But outside of that, most of the other things that he says about Nietzsche, they just go entirely in the opposite direction with. Like when Heidegger says that Nietzsche is the death of metaphysics, Derrida commented that all Heidegger was essentially doing, and it was kind of a bit of a philosophy joke coupled in with a criticism, was he was simply committing a repetition event of the different and the new, trying to gather thought into its quote proper essence and vocation, and thus this would be repeated differently in new ways in the future. So no actual quote unquote death of metaphysics was going to be occurring, despite Heidegger's fears. All of this eventually culminated into what we now know as postmodernism, as was coined by Jean-Francois Lyotard. I think that's how you pronounce it. I might be butchering it.
To me, and I took French, so.
And he came up. He wrote the book, The Postmodern Condition: A Report on Knowledge. This was less of a philosophical essay that was meant to create a new method of analysis, and more an attempt to create an objective report on postmodern thought and how it works. As well as experimenting with Wittgenstein's creation known as language games. The idea that different modes of thought express different modes of language, and that these different language games can be identified, and that depending on the language game you're playing, you're able to do some things but not other things in philosophy. Basically, Lyotard defined postmodernism as, quote, the incredulity towards meta-narratives, which, as a result of its criticism of science, meant that science cannot legitimize other concepts which don't specifically use the denotation language game, because according to the book, science uses the denotation language game exclusively to all other types of language games. Because it does that, it can't legitimize other things that don't use denotation, such as he put it, moral prescription. And since then, there's been a wide debate on the concepts of postmodernism. Plenty of philosophers have contributed to it since then. Derrida, Foucault, Lyotard himself has been a major contributor. Especially as the coiner of the phrase. And there has been a lot of people who have responded to it, though the problem is that most people who respond to it don't actually take it seriously at all, which is definitely not helping. When you have people like Noam Chomsky who say, I don't understand what they're saying. I think they're just making it all up. It seems nonsensical to me, and I don't believe in it. That's a very strange response to any one philosophy, to say, I don't understand it, so it's nonsense. That doesn't really make any sense. And it's very surprising to hear it from someone like him. But there has been valid critiques. I think Habermas is the main one that people go to. He wrote the Philosophical Discourse of Modernity, where he criticized Nietzsche, he criticized Derrida, he criticized Heidegger, he criticized Foucault. He's like, I'm taking you all on, and I'm going to criticize all of your beliefs. And there has been responses to him because he actually took them seriously, which most people, including basically everyone on YouTube, don't actually do.
Right. That was really, really thorough, and you explained things very clearly. So I just want to thank you for that. Now, maybe as we go on in the discussion, we'll talk a little bit about what postmodernism was sort of taking on and challenging in terms of meta-narratives, in terms of what that means about a grand narrative and singular, I think the idea of a singular explanation and stuff. So yeah, I was going to hand it over. I see Gwen nodding. So why don't I just give you the mic? Go ahead. All right. Oh, all right. Now we've got you. Sorry, you were muted.
Okay, can you hear me? Am I good?
I hear you now.
Okay, good. So that was the thing actually that I found very funny, and I don't know, maybe it's sort of ironic, but the day that I uploaded my initial video about Armored Skeptic, I went to his channel, and just by coincidence I saw that he had just uploaded a video, and it was his postmodernism video. So I thought to myself, I've just gone through a year's worth of Skeptics content, and he just made a video about postmodernism. I have to do a video response to this. And I got, I want to say halfway through it before he made some sort of comment about like the history of modernism that postmodernism was responding to. He talks about like the Enlightenment era and stuff like that. And I just remembered, I kind of flashed back to this thing that I remember hearing Greg say, that he doesn't like ideologies. That's something that he said a couple times. And postmodernism is like a weird parallel to that, if you think about it. It's kind of a rejection of that meta-narrative. It's the rejection of the theory that's the rejection of theories. So for someone in Greg's position to have that concept of postmodernism as being this very scary thing, and he doesn't like ideologies, so he's going to shy away from it. There was kind of a simple irony to that I enjoyed, and that sort of compelled me to do a response to Greg. But my response was very much situated in the material that I had studied. When I was an undergrad, I studied English, and I had a minor in philosophy. So a lot of the stuff that I was looking at was having to do with narrative, but very much in the sense of literature, and looking at fiction and nonfiction. And I remember taking a class on a lot of postmodern literature. And I mean, we looked at like Don DeLillo and Mary Caponegro and David Foster Wallace and other such names, other such authors. And I just remember sitting through Greg's video and just thinking, I have no idea what he means, which...
Can you explain a little bit about postmodern literature and what it is that sort of characterizes it and sets it apart from the literature that came before it? Can you, just for people like me?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think in a word, it would be irony. It's very much, and I guess that's also kind of the characteristic that gives it its strength and also its weakness. Irony kind of promotes a commentary that's inherent to the literature. So if you talk about some given subject, you want to address some given social idea, some social context, you're going to maybe address it ironically, and that's going to come off as very insincere. But that's a way to construct a narrative, maybe a fiction narrative, that inherently gives the commentary that you want to give. So I remember one example is there's this short story by Mary Caponegro where she is talking about, I think it's like these kids, and they are like running their own abortion clinic, and it's a very, very absurd story, but it's actually, it's a very loaded story. So it's got a lot of social commentary in it. But there's this kind of funny sense that you always get when you're reading it, like you're constantly stepping back and just thinking to yourself, this is nutty, this is absurd. And that's very much what it's like to read David Foster Wallace. I remember reading his book, Brief Interviews with Hideous Men, which was actually made into a movie. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but I think it's got Ben Gibbard in it, the lead singer for Death Cab for Cutie. Anyway, it's got a lot of really almost surreal kinds of moments in it. And I think it's very difficult for me to explain, because I was only ever an undergrad, and my experience was often feeling very very put off actually by a lot of postmodern literature, not in the sense that I didn't like it, but in the sense that I was worried about the kind of things that David Foster Wallace was writing about more towards the end of his life, where he was worried about the lack of sincerity in literature. And that's the sort of thing that I've always liked very much. So it was very weird for me to find myself in a situation where I felt like I was defending postmodern literature and the rejection of meta-narrative, which is a useful tool, but alone can have some complications.
And can we talk a little bit more about that concept of meta-narrative, since you brought it up and Alex touched on it? Would you be willing to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So I suppose there's kind of a couple ways that people conceptualize it, and in the technical sense, the really common way that people think about meta-narrative is in the break of it. So like a fourth wall break is a kind of very common break in a narrative. Like I remember going to see the Deadpool movie with my father, and every time Deadpool turns and he looks into the camera and he talks to the audience, you get this break in the fourth wall, and he's constantly remarking on the film, and that's how those comic books are. And that's how a lot of literature like that is. But that's a very simple marker, and that's a very technical marker. I think in terms of meta-narrative at the social level, people have shared common ideas that they accept as true, and the rejection of that meta narrative is more to understand that those ideas are just ideas that people have, not necessarily inherent truths that are out in the world. So another weird example that I once gave a science professor of mine was that people think of gravity as just this thing that's constantly out there. But if you think about the history of the universe and everything, not only do we think of gravity in a very relativistic way, things fall to Earth. Actually, it's more complicated than that. But also, there was a point in time in the history of our universe, so scientists have told me, that gravity did not exist. And so, as a law, it's not the kind of absolute perfect truth of life, the universe, and everything that I think people might make it out to be. And that goes for a lot of postmodern conceptualizations of social ideas and of tools within art. And so postmodernists often break the mold of what is considered to be the art. It's like a fourth wall break or any other such similar thing.
All right, I'm interested in your take on this because would you say that is everyone here mostly familiar with Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So the way that
I still haven't seen the last episode of the last season, so hopefully there's no spoilers to that.
No. It's more about the way that Martin subverts all the expectations of what the characters are supposed to be, princesses and princes and bastards and things. And it occurred to me, sort of reflecting on that, that's a sort of very postmodern, it would seem, approach to a traditional fairy tale, to take those kinds of things, our expectations of what are meant, things that are meant to happen to the characters and where they're supposed to end up in their arcs, and really mixing it all up, and the uncertainty then that introduces into the experiences of reading or watching. If I don't know who wants to come back on that.
I would love to, actually, because fantasy literature is totally my thing. But I think it's kind of a two-way street with Martin, because on the one hand, if you listen to him talk about Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire, he very much began with that kind of mindset. Like, he talked about the White Walkers and the Night's Watch, and how if you look at like Lord of the Rings and much older high fantasy literature, there's this sense of using white to denote the bad guys and black to denote things that are evil. And he wanted to kind of flip that narrative. And in flipping it, he's commenting on it, and he's breaking from it. But then at a certain point in the narrative of A Song of Ice and Fire, the story does really want certain characters to succeed, certain characters to win certain battles, and it becomes very sincere. And I think then there's that tension of wanting to break free from not just the tropes of fantasy, but kind of the expectations that the series itself has created. If you're expecting every character to go into the battle and die, it's sort of like you end up wanting to expect the unexpected and then realizing that you shouldn't. Which
is an interesting emotion to have. I can't think of a lot of other shows or pieces of art that have produced those kinds of feelings in me, at least. Yeah, which is part of the reason I like it so much. But we're not going to get on a Game of Thrones tangent. Does anyone else here want to jump in before I try to lead the conversation someplace else? AA, do you have any thoughts on all the things that have been said so far, or any questions?
Nope. Anything I could have added has been explained by both Gwen and Alex here much better than I could have. Honestly, my basic understanding of postmodernism was essentially, well, the basics of it's more a I'm forgetting the words for it, and there was just a motorcycle outside. I don't know if you heard that. Oh shit!
That's why I mute whenever there's background traffic. That's okay.
Well, I mean, I was in the middle of talking, so it wasn't like I could just mute and then come back. Well, I mean, I could have, but yeah. But yeah, basically, I knew that it was more of like a methodology than like an actual philosophy. So as opposed to, I mean, there's a lot of philosophy behind it, but yeah, everything that I could have said has been said by both Gwen and Alex better. They have better understandings than me. I'd also recommend that people watch Gwen's video, as I did.
Definitely. definitely. I'll put a card to that in the video when this goes up as a regular video. The thing I want to throw out now to the experts on the panel would be this question: why do people find postmodernism so threatening, and what do they get wrong about it? I see Jordan Peterson has quite a lot of videos on this. Obviously, you know, Armored Skeptic did a video on it. So what are the perceptions you have of people's objections, and what, if anything, you know, in particular, do they get wrong about it?
I think if a lot of it doesn't really have anything to do with postmodernism. It's kind of the strange thing. The sort of fear that people have for postmodernism is just postmodernism is in a very interesting position where everyone knows it's not something that's easily definable in any sort of discrete way. And so people have this idea, this concept in their head that it's at the very least some sort of philosophy, right? Or that it's some sort of way of looking at the world, but they don't really know what it is. They know they're not one, or at the very least they think they aren't. So it's very easy for anybody to just point to all the things that they think are wrong with modern thought and just blame it on postmodernism, because nobody really has the ability to say that's not what it is, because very few people actually care enough to figure out what it is. So it's less that people fear postmodernism, and from my perspective, at least on the public level. In the academic level, it kind of changes a bit. But on the public level, it's less that people have an actual fear of postmodernism, and more that they have noted that there is a lot of thought going on in their society that they disagree with, and they want to blame it on some sort of all-encompassing phenomena, so they can just sort of say that's the bad thing. I can say that's the bad thing, and I don't have to say anything more. I can just identify it in one word and say that's bad. And then they can just blame everything on postmodernism. They can blame whatever form of feminism they don't like on postmodernism. They can blame any sort of analysis of morality that they think is wrong on postmodernism. They can blame media they don't like on postmodernism. And it's not that simple, but it's definitely sold by people who are supposedly thought leaders as being this all-encompassing boogeyman philosophy, when it's not even a philosophy, it's a methodology. In academia, though, it's a little bit different, because in academia, there's sort of a frustration, because postmodernism is sort of the annoying guy with a pen poking at the scientist and going, yeah, but you don't really know it's true, do you? And then the scientist is just like, could you leave me alone? I'm trying. It's basically, that's basically the fear that, I wouldn't even say fear, the annoyance that people have with postmodernism. It's the fact that postmodernists tend to be very contrarian towards conventional wisdom and conventional thought, and it can be very annoying for those who are trying to investigate things, and it's also the fact that, as I mentioned before, most people who are in not just philosophy but also science don't actually know what postmodernism is all that well either. So when they read postmodernist literature, I mean, they try to read Derrida, Foucault, and stuff. When they try to read it, they don't really understand it. And then they go, well, I don't know how to respond to this, so I'm just going to try to ignore it, but it's not going to go away. So it's just this endless cycle of, I don't know what you're saying. Well, what I'm saying is that you can't be certain. I know I can't be certain, but based on what? I'm trying to explain to you that science is not perfect. Well, sure, it's not perfect, but what's your point? That is my point, that it's not perfect. And then they're just not going anywhere. So postmodernists can't really engage with people because the people don't know what the point of the postmodernists are in the first place. So it's kind of hectic in the academic scene.
Yeah, I guess when I was thinking about that, I see a lot of religious lectures on YouTube talking about the dangers of postmodernism, and I think they're linking it to moral relativism and questioning of those kinds of things. But yeah, Gwen, on that idea of why people find it problematic and what they get wrong about it. Problematic, of course, is a word that sets some people off. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that? And then I say, hey, because we've just been joined here by Ted. So I'm going to come to you after Gwen.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I guess, and I've got something of a pet theory on this. I have a discussion that I keep having with my one friend about political literature and why right-wingers sell so many books, and why can't I sell as many books as Ann Coulter? I think I'm smarter than Ann Coulter, or at least I say things that are more true than Ann Coulter says, so why can't I sell that many books? And I think there's a lot of reasons, but as far as this one particular theory that I have about it goes, I think some people really want to be told certain things, and sometimes there develops a sort of discourse that is somewhat inbred, and with enough fear-mongering about postmodernism coming from people who really do just kind of want that scapegoat, that easy thing to blame for whatever they see as being wrong with contemporary art or contemporary philosophy or society or what have you, there kind of becomes like that really repetitive man of postmodernism. And I don't know, I can't actually say whether or not Armored Skeptic has watched Jordan Peterson's videos about postmodernism, but if I had to bet, I would say absolutely, probably more than one.
You see some echoes of that in Armored Skeptic's work then?
Yeah, I do. And it's in his style. I think Greg has a kind of approach and a way that he vocalizes a lot of his thoughts and feelings on postmodernism in his video. But I definitely, I will confess, I've never sat fully through a Jordan Peterson video, but the bits that I have seen are, there are some things that seem verbatim to be what Greg believes.
Right. So citation needed there. Right. Yeah. So Ted, you're kind of coming in the middle of it, but if you don't have any answers because you just dropped in, that's fine. But were you more interested in speaking on postmodernism or hearing what people had to say, or did you have a question from what you've been listening to? So yeah, what's up with you?
No. On my own.
Yeah, sorry, I'd muted myself for background noise, but yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Well, I did a bit of background reading and I sat through Greg's video, awful as it was, and he seems to be just joining in what they were saying, like every idea they don't like, they just call it postmodernism as a scapegoat. And I guess postmodernism is about thinking outside the box, like the lecture you showed us. What the guy said, okay, that's a table, but who says it's a table? That's what postmodernism is about. Obviously, you can have too much of that kind of abstract thinking, but I don't think people left do that, and I don't think saying, oh, feminism is just postmodernism just because they don't agree with it is helpful. sorry, I'm waffling, I know.
No, but I want to pick up on a point that you mentioned about the idea of concepts. And I watched a lecture that was given, I think, at the University of in Texas on postmodernism. And one of the points that the guy was making was about the way that, again, this comes back to the sort of modern view of things. And I'm pretty sure in Greg's video, when we talk about like the modern period and then sort of postmodernism and then like the modern era of the 1950s. And I think sometimes he kind of conflates the modern era with modernism. And anyway, so yes, this idea that we observe the world came out of empiricism, came out of the Enlightenment. And the idea that this guy was connecting to postmodernism is sort of what Alex was saying about Kant and Nietzsche and the way that information is processed both by our physical bodies and how we perceive things. For instance, people who have, color blindness, red-green, perceive the world differently from other people, right? It's not wrong if that's a perception of it. But then there's also a level on which our society is organized by concepts. What it means to be an American versus being able to pass the Britishness test and the kind of concepts and values and perspectives that are associated on those things. And recognizing those and stepping back from them a little bit and looking at their influence. And I think that's probably, for me, I think that's why religious people find postmodernism so threatening, is because it's, as you said, it's not an ideology, it's a methodology, it's an approach, it's an analytic tool. And that leads to questions. And questions can be dangerous when you need to take things on faith. So.
Definitely. I know some religious people that under their lens homosexuality is wrong. It's a sin, it's amoral. I haven't my moral beliefs and the way I'm centered. I can't obviously think like that at all, but they obviously can't think like I think. So it's all about having like your own different lens, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a particularly loaded example, I know, but fitted.
Yeah, that was no. I appreciate your thoughts on this as always. I see American Anarchist has something to say on this. So we've gone in turns now. Yeah, you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, attempting to avoid being redundant, I'd like to bring up that, like Ted said, the postmodernism is kind of like this scapegoat that people go to, kind of like how the Nazis would go, oh, is there something wrong in your life? It's clearly the Jews. The Jews are the problem. They own all the banks and everything, despite how true or untrue it is. They could point at something and say, hey, since you don't know that, or since you don't understand the nuance of the situation, I can point at Jewish people and I can create a contempt for it and tell you that this is the problem. It's ultimately the same thing with postmodernism. Of course, it's not going to lead to like some kind of genocide of a people, but the way it's scapegoated because people have a hard time explaining it, as Alex said, because really what it is the purpose is, honestly, I really like the way that Alex put this, where he said that postmodernism is kind of that guy poking the scientist with the pen saying, well, you're not certain. You can't be for sure. You can't know this for sure, can you?
I mean, it is kind of like that. That is a bit of a simplification, I will admit.
Well, I have to go for a few minutes to help get groceries up.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, do you want to continue? Yeah, Alex?
Yeah, it is a bit of an oversimplification, is that's what they do, because there is a lot of complex thought when it comes to postmodernism. I just went through a very large history of it for the first half hour of this, and a lot of it it basically boils down to a questioning of our capabilities to come up with a coherent epistemology that actually represents truth in a way in which everybody can understand. And the questioning of that is something that I think is inherent to a lot more people than they would like to admit. As Gwen noted before, in Armored Skeptics' video on postmodernism, he was being very postmodernist in the way in which he approached the subject. And he's very postmodernist in the way he approaches a great many subjects. The only ones that he doesn't approach in that way, to my knowledge, is purely scientific subjects, which he already agrees with. Like, for instance, climate change, or the idea of the world is round and not flat. Or evolution, or just simple things like that. Things that conventionally most people seem to understand is, at least to the degree in which we can establish something, it seems to be true. And all postmodernism is doing is saying, look, science may say all of these things, and we may accept all of these things, and we may be valid for accepting these things. But ultimately, we have to ask the question, if science is so easy, I shouldn't say easy, but if science is so objective and science is capable of giving us all this knowledge, there is a problem that we have in the idea that there are people who exist today who believe the earth is flat, who are of sound mind and body. Why is it they think that? That's something that postmodernism is very interested in trying to figure out the answer towards. The idea that there are people today who far more likely will cling to a fundamentalist and literalist modern creation of literalism in the Bible, as opposed to accepting what science says about the age of the earth and evolution and natural selection and genetic variants and all these things. The fact that there are people who believe in angels still. Why is it that happens? If science were so objective and capable of creating so much truth, why is it that there are so many people who still exist in society today, who participate in society, who will benefit from science, who just ultimately reject it in many different ways? And not only that, but there's people who reject science as it comes up with more things, like the idea of the gender spectrum. That's now starting to become a lot more mainstream. Well, it's been fairly mainstream for a little while in science. The idea that sex isn't even necessarily binary. That's something that scientists have been able to come up with research to validate. But these things are rejected by so many people. Why? Well, not really because the science is flawed. It's just because they don't believe it. And I've always been, and this is a personal thing for me, but I have been of a position for a little while now that the vast majority of people who believe things that are true don't actually believe them because they've analyzed the subject at all. They just so happen to have been lucky enough to be born in a situation where they believe things which are true. That's sort of where I think most people are. And I think postmodernism would agree with that, at least to some extent. It might quibble with me saying true, but I think it would definitely say that's not an inaccurate portrayal of the human condition, and when it comes to knowledge.
Right. I'm going to answer and then kick it over to Gwen because she's up next. While you were talking, my thought was about the fact that because I was trained in the social sciences, in particular political science, one of the things that we look at a lot is voting. There have always been several explanations for why people vote, because there are several reasons why people vote. So we don't, sorry, but when we do one of our linear models, we'll put in their age, whether they identify as a man, woman, we'll put in their education, their social class, we'll put in, other theoretical factors, and we'll come up with a model that, let's say, if we put in party identification, might explain 97% of the variance. That is to say, like, when you have all of these information, you'll only get 3 cases out of every 100 wrong in terms of predicting how people voted. But that's not any one person. You can't apply that equation that we use to test and to interpret the coefficients to any one person. Some people are their party identification. That's just how they vote every time. Other people go from party to party depending on, let's say, economic policy. Some people vote based on who they think can win in that constituency and is closer to them in political space. So this idea, I think, really comes in the natural sciences of there being a right answer and a wrong answer, which of course, being based in mathematics, reinforces that dichotomy. And it's very important that science get things right and not wrong when they're making planes and rocket ships and space stations and running nuclear plants. These are important things to be very precise on. But that doesn't mean that everything in the world is going to fall into those categories or into simplistic answers. You know, there's a joke that in physics, if they have a model for something and it's a circle, it could be either a cow or a coffee mug, because that model actually, like as far as physics goes, sort of pretty well explains it. It explains it enough. It doesn't have to have all the variation. But when you're trying to understand human behavior in societies, you need to take into account a lot of things. Your models have to be a lot more variegated. They have to capture a lot of difference in your population. And so it's never been difficult for me to accept that there can be more than one right answer. It depends on what the question is. And anyway, that was, it's not really to do with modernism. I can't really contribute on a philosophical lens. So at least on a practical lens, I thought level, I would throw that in. And then, yeah, kick it over to Gwen.
I would like to respond actually to something that Alex said, because I would go even further with that comment about the reasons why people believe certain things and come to certain conclusions. I would say even more perhaps than the situations that they're born into. Throughout people's lives, they enter and leave in a great number of situations, and that certain ideas are marketed towards certain people, and certain people are, because of the situation they're currently in or things that have happened to them, maybe traumas, are easier. So it's easier to sell them on those kinds of ideas that are being marketed towards them. So, for example, I remember, and actually, it's funny because Peter Coffin's just making tons of videos that I love recently. He's done a few on postmodernism, and he did one about this particular kind of thing as well. I forget the term that he used for it, but it's stuff like The Secret, which was that book that Oprah Winfrey had on her show some number of years ago. It's like the concept of positive attraction, where if you think good things and feel good things, then good things will happen to you. And of course, as a consequence to that, as a balance to that, if you think bad things, then good things won't happen to you. And then if your situation is bad, then it's because you didn't think enough good things. That kind of thought, regardless of whether or not it's true, appeals to people in certain situations. If you're in a situation where you really feel like you need an escape, but you don't have a lot of practical power over your situation, and suddenly something happens, and mysteriously, miraculously, you escape a very bad situation, you'd be tempted into thinking that, you know, if I just maintain whatever mindset I had at that time, I could continue to reap good benefits of that good mindset. And I think people have a lot of thoughts like that, where they create causal relationships where there aren't any, and that's how they come to a lot of very strange and funny conclusions in their lives.
I think there are certainly, and studies from psychology have shown that some people prefer certainty, and some people are better at tolerance of ambiguity. And I think my tolerance for ambiguity in moral situations or in life or in complex, things is quite high. But again, you find people who are more conservative, people who have clear senses of right and wrong. They're attracted to, law enforcement and other very necessary parts of society. So you could look at it from an evolutionary point. You need both the people who tolerate ambiguity and the people who see right and wrong, because you have to balance each other out a little bit. That's, again, not to do with postmodernism. I'm just trying to be relevant. But yeah, so I think, Ted, if you have anything, of course, if anyone, you can ask a question or do a pass, but if you have any thoughts, yeah, I'm going to kick it over to you now.
Were you kicking it over to me?
Oh, man.
No.
Oh, Ted. Sorry, I'm like missing some things because I'm trying to get my bearings a bit.
Yeah, sorry, I'm really springing it on people. I'm being a very bad hangout hostess. But anyway, I'll be quiet now so Ted can speak.
Oh, well, I was just thinking, like, my political beliefs, they're very strong. In some ways, I can't imagine how they could be different. But I'm sure if my parents were big conservatives, I would probably, if not be a conservative, be slightly more sympathetic to conservative ideology. So that nothing is like black and white in that sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there were. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
the trouble talking about postmodernism because it's about nothing being clear cut. So by nature, it's hard to make a definitive point about something indefinitive.
Right. I mean, it's something that's you're describing the process of, or the result of, or something that has the characteristics of postmodernism, but you're not really pointing at, like we think about ideologies, they're a coherent set of ideas that stick together and they frame the world. And postmodernism is a way of unframing the world, as it were. Yeah. So moving forward, I just want to open up the floor to see if anyone wants to speak about the role of postmodernism and social justice that some people are linking up, because that's an area, again, that I don't know a whole lot about. And if you have thoughts on it, I would appreciate it. So anyone want to take themselves off mute for that? Oh, I see Alex is up.
I would say that when it comes to the subject of social justice and postmodernism, while I think people who are into social justice may be more open to postmodernism, not everybody who's into social justice is necessarily a fan of postmodernism or even knows what it is. A lot of people don't know what it is. But I do think that the deconstruction of how we frame things can be very useful, as it can help provide an understanding and a different perspective of why these things exist and if they even need to exist. Does patriarchy need to exist? Why does it exist? If the answer is no, we can get rid of that. Of course, that's not necessarily part of postmodernism. That's just a general statement I'm making. But the deconstructive nature of postmodernism, how we deconstruct how we frame things, I think that is a very useful tool. But I mean, equating everything social justice to simply being postmodernist, I don't think that that is very accurate on the part of a lot of more right-leaning or centrist YouTubers. Of course, our center is on the right because, well, what's politically correct, the Overton window is very much shifted to the right. It has been doing that for years. So, our center is in the right, but being in the center of the most debated points, so yeah, the right-leaning and centrist people, I don't think that it's necessarily correct on their end to associate everything related to social justice as postmodernist, since, well, one, postmodernism is very broad. It's a methodology. It's not a philosophy. It's not necessarily meant to put ideas, or it's not necessarily meant to create new social understandings. It can be used for that, but it's a very, it's like I said, it's a methodology, and I feel like I'm repeating myself a bit here. If I'm doing it, just stop me.
Well, I wanted to pick up on one point, which isn't really so much related to postmodernism, but I did want to intervene because it's an opportunity to talk about the Overton window. And I have to say, I've seen this word bandied about on YouTube quite a lot, and I've sat through a lot of academic conferences and a lot of academic presentations on voting behavior, and I've never seen this term, the Overton window, and I thought, is this some sort of American thing, or is, you know, in the American literature that I'm not familiar with, or just have I missed out on some sort of panel like every single conference? But then I saw an article and actually want to do a video on this. This was an idea the idea of the Overton window was developed by a guy who worked at like a conservative think tank. And so I actually did a quick search in Google Scholar, and I couldn't find any papers that mentioned the Overton window, so I want to do a bit more research about it. But it is interesting to me that this whole concept has been, you know, generated and talked about and passed around, and yet I don't see any academic work that's actually using it. Now, again, I haven't done that much research because I've been busy doing other things, but it is something that I'm planning on looking at. Gwen, did you, or who was, Alex was up next? I didn't know if anybody wanted to come in on social justice and postmodernism. I'm waiting for somebody to take themselves off.
I could say one or two things that I've just been thinking of. In my experience, first of all, I had a few mentors who were feminists when I was an undergrad, and they did not necessarily get along with postmodernists. And part of that was that David Foster Wallace actually taught at my university for a time, and so I think there was sometimes some bad blood between certain professors. But that's not to say that there is an overlap in the methodology between people who care about social justice and people who want to understand the world through a postmodern or a meta-modernist lens. There is, I think, a degree to which deconstruction is inherent to any approach of social justice that wants to be critical of the society in which you live. You know, you're trying to understand the things around you, and you break them down into smaller parts, and you talk about those parts. And that all makes a lot of sense. But I guess with regards to the Overton window, it's interesting because the first person I ever heard use the term was Glenn Beck. And I was like, what is the... I was thinking what I was always thinking when Glenn Beck would talk, which was, what is this guy talking about? But
me too.
But the part of it that I'm concerned about is the window part, because I think if you think about politics as being a left to right spectrum, and you think about a window, that sort of inherently means that something on the outside is accepted, and then whatever's on the middle is or something everything on the outside is not accepted, and whatever's on the inside is accepted. And as an analysis of whatever ideas society is willing to accept at large at the time, that's fair, but it does sort of capitulate to whatever the center of the window happens to be. You could very easily imagine that ideas on the far left and the far right could be simultaneously accepted in different parts of society, and then you would have like two Overton bubbles. But the term window does seem to endorse a certain style of thinking.
To me, it implies a narrowing. And, you know, if I were to do a really kind of weird analogy, but think about a snake eating rocks of different sizes. I mean, this to me, the spectrum is the spectrum. Now, it might change based on the century you're in or the political system you're in terms of constraining you to a two-party system and then that lining up on sort of a left-to-right spectrum. But this idea of a window, as you say, sort of seems like it takes that and it compresses it, but it stretches out certain parts of it or makes it bigger in some kind of way. And it's just really not how, when you look at a population and you're measuring attitudes and political identifications and parties that you would vote for, you see parties go up and down, or you see ideologies become more unpopular. You know, you have generational waves where there's more older people, so people are more conservative. You have a younger wave, like in the 1960s, and all my background noise, and things go a bit more left. So you have this over time change as well. But it's like I said, it was something that I've been scratching my head about over for a while. And I've kicked off the conversation. Oh, Alex, you said you had some problems with your device. So have you fixed those?
Yeah, I have a manual mute button on my device that I just reflexively turn on whenever I smoke on my vape, and I didn't turn it off. So
Yeah, postmodernism and social justice, or something else that you want to pick up on?
You know, as far as postmodernism and social justice goes, it's kind of interesting because I don't know exactly how to put it. It's like a squares and rectangles sort of thing. Like, I've never met a postmodernist that wasn't interested in social justice, but I have met many people interested in social justice who definitely do not like postmodernism, and that's an interesting thing to me. I think that the rejection of meta narratives, this sort of deconstructionist view of society and the way things are, it's a rejection not only of traditionalism and conserving things, not necessarily conservatism and as a whole, but can you hear me now? I momentarily disconnected.
See,
Oh God, there's two of me in the room. I don't know how that happened.
you've got a doppelganger. You're gonna die in a few weeks.
Ah, no.
Slip in our little inside joke.
Oh no. Everything goes wrong technologically wise when I'm involved. Okay, so blah. Postmodernists tend to be interested in social justice, but many people in social justice are not very interested in postmodernism. So the thing for me is that because postmodernists are so interested in deconstruction and going against meta narratives, there's sort of this necessary thing of them going against not only traditionalism and social conventions that we take for granted these days, but it goes against centrism as well. And I think that when you go against traditionalism and centrism, when you want to go in the opposite direction of these things, it sort of necessarily propels you towards an interest, not necessarily in social justice, but at the very least, something to the left of any of that, politically speaking. So I don't necessarily think the postmodernist thought is inexorably connected to interest in social justice matters, but I do think that it's definitely a starting off point that will propel a lot of people to go in that general direction. At the very least. And because that's the case, because you won't find a postmodernist who's not at least somewhat leftist, the issue there is that it's very easy to conflate postmodernism and leftist philosophy in general, at least by people who are not either of those things, be it centrists or people who are on the right. So that's sort of why we see a lot of, it's one of the reasons why we see a lot of the conflations that we see with people like Jordan Peterson, who try to say that basically anything that's left of him is wrong because postmodernism. I think that's kind of the only actual connection that there is that the fundamentals of rejecting meta narratives will just push you left. Almost inevitably. So it's easy to associate them together like that. I don't think it's a necessary connection that one causes the other, but they are definitely kissing cousins, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I just jump off of that real quick because I think that it's funny the conflations that people pull. I've seen like postmodernism and feminism are the same, and postmodernism and like anything, like name a thing. But the one that I think is funny is postmodernism and collectivism, because I think that as far as the drift to the left that you see from people who have a lot of social justice and postmodern sympathies, there is something to that. I think that there's a kind of concept of collective narrative that is used to kind of break the meta narrative that you find in postmodernism.
And hey, I'm back.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry about that. My internet connection
Kristi's
dropped
back.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I figured you guys were I wasn't worried you'd be able to handle it because you guys are fabulous and you have such great things to say. But yeah, my wireless connection dropped out, so I had to get over and get the lead and run it to my laptop and plug it in and refresh the page. It was a thing.
Oh,
was a whole
trust me,
thing.
I know that all too well. I've actually dropped out of a few of my own streams, so I think that's what happened because I'm like, well, the stream's still running, and if Kristi intentionally dropped out, it would have stopped running on YouTube. Like, it would have just cut short.
Yeah, I wouldn't not say goodbye. Right. So we've been going now for about an hour and a half, which it's been a great talk, but it maybe be time to wrap it up in the next 6 to 16 minutes. But before I did that, I wanted to just throw out the floor here for anybody who had anything they wanted to talk about that we haven't covered, or ask any questions that are outstanding. So yeah, go ahead.
I wasn't sure if Ted wanted to go first. He looked like he wanted to go first.
You go.
Okay, thank you. So there was actually a question in the chat and a follow-up statement. I mean, kind of looking at both of them. Somebody asked what postmodernism would look like in the future, and then somebody else said, well, I don't think, from what I understand, postmodernism is for the most part dead, so I'm not sure it has a future. But I don't think it's dead. I just think it's being taken, paradoxically speaking, postmodernism is a rejection of conventional ways in which to do thought and art, and trying to create something new, a new way to tell a story, a new way to examine a philosophical concept. And so whether or not there are philosophers who promote postmodern thinking, there's still going to be this postmodern. Hi. You joined us at the butt end.
Hello, Bronx blogger. You joined us right at the end.
Oh my god! Let me get my microphone.
All right, we're going to put you on mute till then, okay?
Sure, thank you.
All right.
So like what I was saying was basically that postmodernism, as it is used in philosophy, as it is used in art, as it is used in fiction and storytelling in general, in movies and shows and what have you, it's not going to go away. It's whether or not there are people who are advocating for it, it doesn't really matter. There's still going to be people who want to do something new, who learn about the medium in which they want to interact with, and then want to do something different with that medium. Whether or not that's actually expanded upon as to why with postmodernist philosophers in any way is going to be kind of irrelevant. What I can say about the future of postmodernism, whatever it is, it's definitely not going to be anything that we have seen thus far, because that is the fundamental nature of it.
Right. Very well said. I don't really know if I could top that, so I'm not even going to try. Ted, I think you were going to speak next, and then, yeah.
Oh no, it might go round in a big circles. Society could be so postmodern that the most postmodern thing to do is stick to the norms. But
Right. That's when conservatism becomes the new punk rock.
hopefully not. But who knows? One day, Paul Joseph Watson might be right once. But the one serious thing I thought of thinking politically is I know this is statingly obvious, really, but the left always does a bit about change, and the right does a bit about citing, about sticking to traditions. So it's in the right's nature that they hate postmodernism because it's about change and they don't do change.
Well, while you were speaking, we were joined by another guest. So, hello, Tim. How are you?
God.
I don't know if
People joining
our
late.
Bronx blogger is
Mike is good to go.
I thought it was going to start in half an hour, to be
All
honest.
right.
I know you keep saying check the link, but I had just, in my mind, decided it was at 11. But,
Well,
whatever. Okay,
that's
half an hour.
a problem with your perspective. You have a
That
limited
would be-
perspective on reality. So
Yeah,
I have a
11
postmodern
p.m.
perspective on
my
time.
time. 11 p.m. my time. That's when we started.
I was
but-
like,
yeah.
we're going by Pomo time, right?
Yes. Well, we're coming near the end of the hangout,
Yes,
so
Tim,
now we
we're
can
going
just
by
start it all over again.
postmodern time. There's no objective time.
So we've mostly been talking about postmodernism, really not so much about Armored Skeptic, although he's come up occasionally. But yeah, we had the Bronx blogger showed up before you did, Tim. So
Cool.
yeah, if you have thoughts on postmodernism, the topic we were just going around was postmodernism and social justice, but you could really speak on anything that you had thought interesting about the topic.
Okay, thank you. So, for me, my channel is mostly about tracking the sort of the twin speak between the alt-right and the center-right that call themselves liberals on YouTube. That includes Greg. So I think I mentioned this in the comments section for Gwen's video, this idea of, well, someone like Armored Skeptic can't talk about cultural Marxism, but he wants those right-wing Patreon bucks. So he substitutes in postmodernism as like a parallel dog whistle for cultural Marxism. The way that he presents postmodernism is essentially like the Jordan Peterson alt-right brand of social cultural menace,
Yeah, actually that parallel was brought up earlier. And so it's interesting that you also bring it up on that topic.
there does seem to be an intersubjective consensus on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty naked. I think that pandering paranoia online is highly monetizable. I think that, especially with the adpocalypse, you're going to see a lot of people emulate the Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin model of, supposedly like fishhook theory. You know what I mean? Like, I'm in the center, but boy, is the left so much worse than the right. This is my Patreon link.
I don't feel very strongly about any one particular subject, but I will say the people you don't like are bad and the people you like are good. So,
yeah.
I'm being rational and skeptical. I am. Yeah, Tim.
Although Alexander missed something, there's no such thing as objective consensus because there's no such thing as objectivity.
As I said,
now I'm just being silly.
I said intersubjective consensus. So there you go.
Owned.
I guess you ruined my joke. Now I'm good.
Yes, you can always count on me to ruin humor. That's what I do. That's what I'm here for.
I mean, my jokes suck anyway. But my jokes suck harder than a vacuum.
Well, I have a question for the panel very quickly. Do you guys think that Greg really believes this paranoid stuff, or like is it a dumbness thing, or do you think like it's a cynical pandering thing, or 50-50, meaning like does he drink the Jordan Peterson Kool-Aid, or does he look at the Jordan Peterson Patreon and go, this is money, you know what I mean?
I think it might be a combination of he believes it to some extent, but also he thinks, I believe whatever gets me money.
I don't want
whatever pays my bills, whatever pays my rent.
I also think it's sort of the nature of just being in a scene where everybody is repeating the same kinds of talking points all the time. Like, 'cause sometimes you challenge a talking point, like, I don't know, something to do with, I don't know, anything, take your pick, like the pay gap, or like patriarchy, or like whatever it may be, postmodernism, and there's just a knee-jerk reaction, because like in certain circles, like those words have taken on certain meanings, and you can't actually challenge those meanings. So I think Greg often, like, I mean, that's maybe why I don't see him as such a skeptic, because he often just takes what the kind of general consensus in his personal social realm is, and just says like, yeah, I'm going to talk about the problem with postmodernism and the problem with Antifa and the problem with SJWs or whatever, and it's always just like the same shit that's just circulating in his circles, you know.
As an interesting side note, Kristi, does that remind you of in any way of Kierkegaard's statements on society and how it's pulled together by the press and all that sort of stuff that I mentioned near the beginning?
Earlier in the talk. Yep. And oh damn, I was gonna make a point and now I can't remember what it was. Tim, what were you talking about again? I was distracted by Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard, the public. I'm going back an hour in time to try to pull that up.
I was just saying, like, you know, I mean, maybe cynically some of it is just like, I'm just pandering to do whatever, but I think some of it is just uncritically being like, if everyone I talk to is like, postmodernism is bad in some way, so I've just taken that on board, and I'm just going to I'm going to play into that perspective because that's what everyone around me also says, so it must have validity to it.
I remember now, which is, sorry, I'm going to cut you off this time, Tim. Sorry, burn.
Explaining.
When it comes to, I remember, and if this is wrong, I will certainly hold my hand up and say I was wrong on this. But I do remember Greg at one point in a video saying that he has dyslexia, so reading for him is a challenge, which I get. I totally get that. And I think when he started his channel, he would go to science textbooks or stuff that he knew. Right. And there are a lot of videos on science and stuff, so he could get the information easily, and he would just sort of do a face value reading of it. Because there are deep philosophical questions that you can ask in science, but he would just present what he had heard, you know, because it was already out there. And then when he moved into social justice, I think he just took confirmation bias and did the same thing. But the thing was, you know, that worked when he was repeating what science was saying because science was right in most of the time. But here he's just giving opinion as almost fact. And that actually work.
In his video to Steve Shives way back, he made a very telling comment, when he was like, I learned a lot of what I know about deductive reasoning and logic and blah 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 from watching Steve's videos. And he's like, so it's very disappointing to see that Steve has gone down this social justice path, and now he's just a shadow of his former self or whatever. But it's kind of telling that, like, okay, you learned all this shit from watching YouTube videos? Like, really? Like, that's it, you did it? I mean, no, like, offense to Steve, but, like, I don't know if he should be your course on how to do reasoning. Like, you should probably also, like, study some books and, like, university and... Yeah, you know, so it's kind of like, okay, he gets a lot of his knowledge from watching YouTube videos. So maybe he watches like Vernaculus and Sargon and I don't fucking know. Maybe a bit of Jordan Peterson and some other shit. And he's like, yeah, postmodernism's evil. So
it's go ahead.
Sorry. In the beginning, before some of you guys got here, I did like a half-hour precursor explanation as to how postmodern thought came to be, essentially. And a lot of it was very brief, and it was not like it sounded like it was a lot, but it really wasn't, because it's like 300 years of thought being coagulated into a half hour. So I was just trying to give a general explanation, and for a lot of it, I would reference who I'm talking about. I would give books that you can read. I would explain the sources for all the information. But what I gave was a very basic explanation, kind of simplified. And I think a lot of postmodernists would be a little dissatisfied with how much that I gave, because I don't want to be this guy who's, hey, I've read a little bit more than other people, so I'm a freaking expert. Which is something that's very common here on YouTube. And I think that very many people, not just large personalities like Armored Skeptic, I think very many people on YouTube get a lot of their knowledge primarily from watching YouTube videos, because it's entertainment coupled with the supposed education that they want to get. So it's not something that I really too terribly much blame him or anybody else for, because I see hundreds of thousands of people doing it. And I don't know.
I wouldn't say that like a YouTube video is automatically going to have bunk information. It's just like, you don't know necessarily which YouTube video is going to be on the level and which is just going to be like selling you some magic beans or whatever. You know, so you have to use your skepticism to be like, okay, is this YouTube video like really giving me accurate information that's well sourced and is something that I can actually depend on, or is this just some ideological shit from someone who hates Marxism or something? You know,
you need to lower your bar to just giving your sources. That's like if they would just more often give their sources and
Maybe,
not just like a video response, but actual research that they've done, so you could click on the links and see what they're using.
Yeah, but the sources are shit, aren't they? Like, sorry, the problem with the skeptics at this point, right, when they shifted into social justice, is they followed this Sargon model of like, if I'm not reading an article out loud, I'm not going to put any sources. And then like when they do put sources, it's like Breitbart or the Canadian version of Breitbart, the Rebel Media, but they crop out the top so that you don't see that their reactionary article is from like a really, really discredited source. And then later on, like, this is so cyclical. Greg puts up a reactionary article, chops the top off, and then later goes, oh, I guess I didn't vet that. I got the views and the money. Now on to the next subject.
Well, someone in the comments here said YouTube is like school, but free. But I would say it's less, like the standards for YouTube are more loose and just completely, it's like a free-for-all in terms of what standards videos should or need to have. Like, at least at school there could be some rules about, when we say 2 + 2 = 4, like that's just what we do in maths, like it's part of the curriculum. Whereas in YouTube, it's like if someone wants to say 2 + 2 = 5, like if they say it in a very convincing way, you might be like, that's why maths is bad, because 2 + 2 = 5. It's like, oh, by the way, like 2 + 2 doesn't = 5. I just wanted to tell you that. Like,
it goes beyond.
I saw it on my favorite content creator said it did.
It goes a little bit beyond even that, because the thing is, anybody can make it look like whatever they're saying on YouTube is very professional. You can
like
just
Pigeon Speaks.
Yeah, you can have like a PowerPoint presentation going on. You could even set up a camera in like a room with maybe like 3 people in it that are your friends, and have it look like you're doing like a lecture with a PowerPoint presentation, and like you might be full of shit. You might not be saying anything that's accurate, but you are making it look professional, so people go, huh, that's interesting, because perspective dictates whether or not people think that you have any sort of validity to what you're saying, as opposed to simple wholesale truth.
But people might say that means that we're just dismissing YouTube completely, and I'm not. I'm just saying, like, apply skepticism TM to the videos you watch and like look into them and be like, is that accurate? Yeah, that was a good video because I checked it out and it seems accurate. Yeah, great video. Whereas other videos, it's like they're just selling you a bunch of bullcrap and then you regurgitate it on your channel.
Well, when Worski, I noticed when Worski got demonetized, and this is for the room, he made a very specific point that I thought sounded like brainwashing, which is like this idea of the jokes are incidental, like the humor is a means by which to red pill people. You know what I mean? Like I can't comprehend how accurate information needs to be veiled in humor in order to deliver this like revelatory truth to people. It seems really, really insidious that like, we're going to make you laugh, and also aren't Muslims bad,
Yeah.
My point was going to be, if you want to learn something on YouTube, go to the Yale YouTube channel, go to the Harvard YouTube channel, go to the Stanford YouTube. There are a lot of courses that are free. On iTunes too, and start with the academics and the professionals and see what they're saying, and then go check out Sargon.
Well, it's the same with like, someone mentioned Breitbart and that kind of stuff. Like, approach their articles with a high level of skepticism because they're a bunch of shit, and then other news sources are a bit more reputable and more likely to be less full of crap. You should still like check to see whether they're telling you the truth, because sometimes, like occasionally, they might have an article that's not on the level.
Yeah, you should still check. You should still check like where their information is sourced from, because
the validity of what they're saying. Yeah.
actual shit. Like,
Yeah, I was just going to say this is now conversation free for all. So take yourself off mute if you have something you want to say and interrupt the people speaking. That's so I'm kind of
sorry.
backseat.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to shoot back at Tim for something that he said, because he mentioned, and he didn't say it this way, but this is how I think of it. It's like, I feel like I treat YouTube the way that everybody else treats Wikipedia. If you make a YouTube video and you say a bunch of stuff, I just look at your sources, and if you can take me to your sources and they're really amazing sources, that's awesome, and I would love to listen to more YouTube videos like that. But if you go to a Wikipedia article and it's a bunch of really outlandish nonsense and there's no citations, what are you going to think?
But I can imagine that if, they did that study on Wikipedia to see how accurate it was, and it was like reasonably high, I would imagine if you did the same study on YouTube, it would be pretty fucking low. Like, it would be like, a very surprisingly low percentage of videos are just completely full of shit. Like, I bet.
There are videos on the Mandela effect on YouTube. I mean, there's just like, there's nonsense. There's no.
Well,
there's no script.
They can't even be bothered to. The average skeptic video can be debunked with like 3 seconds on Google or 5 seconds on Wikipedia, and I think that's what makes it so difficult to call them out, is that they're not even bothering with the most cursory stuff. They think that a reaction video. Blair White is very, very into the shit of like, you can't hold me accountable. This is my reaction to this thing. Well, yeah, you can react to a video of a dog taking a shit in a salad. That's purely subjective. But like, fucking, this is my reaction to Noam Chomsky. What a dickhead, like.
I want that on a loop. I want that on a loop.
Why does he wear those stupid sweaters?
Yeah, why doesn't he change his sweater? What a fucking cock.
Exactly. Low energy, I swear.
I do see that Ted had took his mic off, and so I want to just intervene and let him have a chance.
What another thing I thought, the main difference between YouTube and academia, in academia, the truth prevails, well, hopefully, but on YouTube, it's what's popular. You okay there, Bronx? YouTube, what's popular prevails. It is populist, which in some ways is good, but it's bad in that it so happens now all the right-wing shit seems to rise to the top, because that's what everyone wants, and people don't want to hear that it's a lot of bullshit, even though it quite clearly is.
There was a video that I think perfectly encapsulates the level of academics that you should expect on YouTube, that anyone should expect on YouTube. And I think the context of how I came across this video is very important to establish this, but essentially there's a guy who made a documentary on why that History Channel show Ancient Aliens was nonsense. It was like a 2.5 hour documentary of him going through all of Ancient Aliens and explaining why all of it is wrong. And I thought it was very well done. And but near the end of it, he started to go into, because Ancient Aliens did an episode on the Bible, and he went into the Bible in a way in which indicated to me that, okay, well, this guy is a Christian, but that's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being a Christian. And I decided I like this guy. I think he's got some interesting things to say. So I found another video of him, which was another 2.5 hour documentary on him debunking someone, this time David Icke. I don't know if any of you know who that is.
Yep. Lizard man.
No, and maybe people in the audience don't. So can you give a bit of background?
So Icke is essentially the guy who came up with the reptilians conspiracy, that everybody who's in charge of the world are actually reptiles.
The lizard man.
So that's essentially what he's known for. So it's a 2.5-hour documentary explaining why David Icke is wrong about his kooky beliefs. And you know, I like background noise. I know it's just going to be confirming what I believe, but that's fine. About 20 minutes into this documentary, there was a very interesting point where the guy shows David Icke talking about depictions of about religion, and David Icke explained that he felt that religion was very controlling. It was used to control the masses and the like, and it was probably invented by people who were already planting the seeds for world domination earlier in the history. And the guy responded by saying, "This is why I think David Icke might be possessed by a demon." And I'm like,
okay.
Okay, was that a joke? Was
a joke? Yeah.
So I thought, okay, that might be a joke of his. And he said the reason why is because he's very offended by religion in general. Also, there are these other instances in which he looked at Jesus imagery and had to look away, and another time in which he saw a cross and had to look away. I'm like, are you serious? Are you actually saying that he's possessed by a devil?
Yeah.
Maybe he was a psyop. The guy.
As it continues, I start to realize that this is a guy who is debunking David Icke's reptilian conspiracy theory by saying, no, it's not reptilians, it's demons, and they're the ones who are in control. And I'm like, what?
Right. So he's more of so he debunked David Icke using Alex Jones logic.
Yeah, exactly. Infowars, yeah.
That, to me, encapsulates...
Obama's a demon, and Hillary smells like sulfur.
Goblin. I mean, he literally responded to a conspiracy theorist with a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting thing. I had never seen anything like it before, but I honestly think it encapsulates the education levels you should expect on YouTube.
This demon
you had to get through hours of content to get to it.
I don't think it's incidental, that both Sargon and Dave Rubin have been on InfoWars. I don't think that is happenstance. I think that when they shifted into this clawback form of skepticism, which is like, what did Patreon say? Pizzagate? Yeah. That's the financial model that InfoWars basically works on. His audience comes to him and says, lizard people. He says, hey, what are the views on lizard people? Yep, lizard people. Right? It's a hustle, right? So that's that. And again, Sargon wasn't always brought onto that. It's when he became a pure reactionary. When debunking creationism was no longer monetizable, these two supposedly liberal people went on Alex Jones and they were like, whatever, clouds are made out of pizza dough, like whatever pays Patreon this month. And I think that goes with the armored skeptic thing. It's like yeah, exactly. It's like June wants new shoes. What, Versace? Yeah, whatever. Like when you make coffee, bro, you kill angels, and they're like, yeah, more Patreon.
You make coffee, you kill angels.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like whatever you pay me to say. Yeah, whatever you pay me to. Monetization is what creates this clusterfuck of information. Just like with Fox News going. Popping up on cable and stuff like that, just like when they moved news divisions in the U.S. and made them have to be profitable, like Network, when they talked about that shift. Anytime the dispersing of political information is monetized, you end up with a situation of, like Fox News, where they're like, I don't like gay people. And they're like, wait a minute, there was a hurricane. Yeah, gay people did that. Bam, 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 ratings.
And then Dave Rubin comes in.
All the gay people were fucking in a cold front, and that caused a warm front to meet with a cold front, and there was a hurricane.
And Dave Rubin's like, I want to have you on my channel to talk about these storms being caused by gay people. And I'm gay, so obviously I'm not a homophobe. So I'm gay married, by the way.
I mean, that's...
But I'm just to, get the topic back to the postmodernism thing. So do we establish kind of like what we think it is versus perhaps what skeptics said it was?
I would love to hear your take on that, Tim, and then also the Bronx blogger as well.
Yeah.
Well, like my impression on that would just be like, actually I studied postmodernism, I think multiple times at at university, and to be perfectly honest, I was not very interested in the subject. Like, I was a bit bored, and I was just like, okay, it sounds like a bit of old shit, to be honest, when they're talking about like what postmodernists believe. And I don't know if that's on me or if it's just like the way the lecture was delivered or like a mixture of both, probably. But I think it was like I'm a skeptic, even though he did a terrible job of talking about what it was. He did rekindle like my interest in the subject and like got me reading more about it and like remembering things that I'd learned about it. And I just find it very interesting how he was not able to say in a very simple way what postmodernism is, because I think you can say it in like one sentence, which would just be, it's the rejection of, and Dr. Lehman talked about it in his video, like it's the rejection of grand narratives or meta-narrative. And that's basically just, in a nutshell, without all of the extra information that comes with postmodernism, because it can get really complicated, you can just sum it up in that one sentence, like it's rejection of grand narratives. And then when you're talking about things like impressionism and modernism and futurism and Marxism and all of these different isms and ideas, you can just sum up postmodernism by saying like postmodernists didn't believe that any one particular way of thinking about the world was enough to kind of encapsulate an individual's experience about the world. Like Marxism was never going to be able to sum up your entire human experience, and yet there's people like totally dedicated to Marxism, and like impressionists are trying to put this specific structure onto the things they see and then paint them in a specific certain way. And postmodernists say like, you know, that way of seeing the world is just one way of seeing the world. It's not like the be all and end all way of seeing realities. And they just believe like people don't necessarily have these grand narratives, and they don't have these like meta narratives where everything can be put in this neat little box, you know. And in a sense, like people were saying, there's something very skeptical about postmodernism, because if you look at a structure, you say, wait a minute, I'm not sure if that's enough to explain what's going on here. You know, we've got these like neat confines of like Marxism or something, but there's other things that fall outside the Marxist box that I can put into my explanation here. And if I think about it from the way that I see it, I don't think that's enough to sum it up. And so I reject that narrative, you know? And I think he just completely missed that very simple way of seeing it, you know? Yeah. It just, and he could just look at like the guy who defined it, like Jean-Francois Lyotard or whatever, who just basically just said that. He was just like, it's just rejection of narratives, you know? It's like we're all, it's actually kind of individualistic in a sense, you know? Yeah. Yeah,
well, here's my cynical New York take, because when I walk down the street, I meet 10 different hustlers a day. Here's my frame for how I process Greg's perspective on this. I think that Greg came from an era when, during the end of the Bush era and the beginning of the Obama era, there was a war between conservative white men and liberal white men. I think that as that war sort of petered out, the liberal white men, that's like TJ, Armored Skeptic, Bill Maher, Dave Rubin, who used to be on the Young Turks, they found common cause and again, I supported Bernie Sanders during the primary. This is not a Bernie Bros argument at all, but for so many years during the Reagan and the George W. Bush Jr. administration, liberal white men saw themselves unchallenged. The villain, when they said white men, when Bill Maher said white men, he meant the Koch brothers. When we got to social issues, this thing that they cry about called identity politics, it actually meant that in order to get justice was not just about getting the Koch brothers to pay money, you know, pay more taxes. It's about a justice movement where liberal white men are not the vanguard. His postmodernism at the time against creationism, he loved postmodernism. Armored Skeptic's whole thing was deconstructionist and postmodernist against conservative white men, until he realized that when their privilege goes, his privilege goes. And if the justice movement, if Bill Maher can't lead the movement for justice, then postmodernism, fuck it, and we're going to preserve the existing order. And just like Jordan Peterson is not a skeptic, and yet somehow Armored Skeptic is behind the guy, even though he's literally a Christian. It's
Right.
this thing of, I'm not going to have my liberalism taken by queers, black people. You know, like, I'm down for justice as long as it's got a white male penis running the
It's
show.
like the Phil Oakes song. Phil Oakes song, "Love Me, I'm a Liberal."
Yeah,
I don't know that one.
that's
I
a
think
little
that's
red.
really-
That's a little red and black.
I think that's a really interesting analysis. A really
Yeah.
interesting analysis.
Well, I
I-
think
yeah.
Jordan Peterson actually employs a lot of like postmodernism thinking. Like he's got like the like pre. That's not a word. I was gonna say pre-postmodern. I just kind of made it out. But he's got like the non-postmodern perspective. He's got like he's got the perspective of seeing everything through Christianity, but he also has this belief of like a personal interpretation of the Bible and of faith and stuff that gives life meaning. So he's always like, meaning is provided by the personal views that you have of this book in a subjective way, and that's a bit postmodern in a way.
He's
Like,
he's a rambling heroin addict, bro. That's who Jordan Peterson is. If
but he
you
also has
watch
the
his-
structure. He also has the structure of Christianity and the whole structure of a specific belief system. So he's a walking contradiction. He's like, it's all about personal subjective.
He's floating on heroin, brother. That's what it is. Every heroin addict on my block has like all this this revelatory stuff happening as they get high, and then they pass out. You know what I mean? You know, have you seen how many like deranged videos of just him sitting there crying, and the Virgin Mary wept, and you're like, holy, his brain is fried.
Yeah. But I think a lot of that is a postmodern lens. Like he's looking at a specific structure through a very subjective, personal narrative lens. Saying this is what gives the world meaning. And I know like other people will line up with that, but that's very much like his personal subjective viewpoint on like what provides meaning in the world. And a lot of the people are like soaking it up, being like, Jordan Peterson, you're a fucking genius. Oh my God. But if you're like, he's implying, I mean, he's using a very postmodern lens sometimes. They're like, what? Shut up.
He's a white-faced Deepak Chopra. That's who he is. He just takes Deepak Chopra's shift and puts like George Washington's face on it. You know what I mean?
Well, he's a mixed bag of different styles of thinking, and he just sort of gloms it all together, and you're like, this guy's a genius.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A brilliant con man. His shtick appeals to. I used a clip where he was like, white privilege is fine. We should just earn our privilege. That's liberal white man shit. That's like, yeah, of course, white privilege. Yeah, I'm entitled to that, but like, I earned it.
I mean, you mentioned this before, Tim, is that you can explain what postmodernism is in one sentence, but the problem is the vast majority of people won't understand what that sentence is. Like you can say it's a rejection of meta narratives, and the natural response for most people is going to be, what the fuck is a meta narrative? I don't know what that means. So actually explaining that's going to be a big issue. So,
well, you could say it's the rejection of the idea that a specific school of thought can explain reality, I guess.
Right. Or even that we have enough tools in general right now in our reasoning in order to come to in order to successfully be able to suss out everything that is reality.
But that doesn't imply one school of thought can't do all of it. You know, I mean, if we don't have the tools to explain reality, then one particular school of thought's not going to have everything, and it's not going to be like a magical toolbox. Like, I think some people do that with science. So, like, science can explain everything, and it's like we don't fully know that. And science is a fantastic tool, and it's always making progress. But it's not like we can just literally explain everything with science at this exact moment in time. Maybe sometime in the future we could.
You know how there's a lot of people who say that, like, science can give us a lot of information, but it can't give us moral prescriptions on anything. That's a postmodernist belief.
Yeah,
that is entirely postmodernist. What that is saying science is good enough for this stuff, but it's not good enough for that stuff.
Yep.
So, but and so many people agree with that. Many people who criticize postmodernism, but that's what it is.
Yeah,
but I think like Richard Dawkins and stuff, he does his best to be like, science can give us that emotional gut thing. But I'm not too sure about that. Like, there is like science behind the music and poetry, and there's science behind everything. And I guess there's science behind the way that you feel about stuff, but you're not going to see it through like a scientific lens. You're going to see it through more of a like romanticized, personal, emotional lens when you listen to like a poem that you really fucking like. Like maybe Richard Dawkins reads a poem he loves, and he's like, "Oh, this is good because science, like because my, my neurons are going off, and like my feelings are rising, and the poem is arranged in a way that works on my neurology." But I don't think your average person is going to think of it that way. They're going to think like, I'm having a personal, emotional, postmodern reaction to this, like it's a subjective experience. And I think Richard Dawkins does his best, but I'm not sure if you can just say science is enough to make people want to stay alive and keep going about their life. Like they're still likely to get fucking depressed about how empty shit seems,
Well, the annoying thing is that, well, for me anyway, is that Sam Harris is probably the biggest of the proponents of science can figure out morality. But when you see him talking to people, he actually will back away from that position immediately as soon as he's called on it. Like, I don't mean science alone can determine morality. Obviously, there's some other philosophy that's going to be necessary. It's like, well, then what's the point of your book then that you said when that was the whole premise? Yeah. And majoritively when he talks about
and then he's like, "Stop lying! You're taking me out of context.
You're taking me out of context." And when majoritively when he talks about the subject, he's not really trying to establish any sort of meta-ethical theory or framework. What he's trying to do is say secular morality is superior to religious morality, which most people already agree with. So whatever.
Well, I mean, okay, like someone in the comments says science gives me spiritual inspiration, so I disagree. I'm not saying that science can't give you spiritual inspiration. I'm just saying, like, if it was as simple as you just explain how science gives people spiritual inspiration and that's good enough for everyone, then we wouldn't have like all of these other schools of thought which go kind of contrary to science. It's not. It's like that's not fully satisfying for just the general swath of human beings. Like I'm sure it could be satisfying to you and satisfying to Richard Dawkins, but other people want to like they want to find something more to explain reality, for better or worse. They want to find some kind of spiritualism.
Yeah, but that's the problem with someone like Sam Harris. Sam Harris, and that Molyneux guy. They have Stefan Molyneux, right?
Yeah.
They create like these secular cults. Say anything bad about Sam Harris on Twitter, your nuts are gone. They're right off immediately. A whole army, whole army of really angry liberal white dudes shows up and tells you why you shouldn't challenge the one true prophet, Sam Harris.
Yeah.
Then Molyneux's people the same thing.
People I'm normally very friendly with. They just turn on me instantly. They're like, "Do you are speaking Sam Harris again, Tim? I thought you were over this lying that you do." And I'm like, "God damn it!"
Literally, Sam Harris created his career off of lying mixed with saying just really vacuous and pointless shit.
Yeah,
what he says is either pointless or a lie.
Strangely enough, about like 4 years ago, you could, well, I would even say as early as 3 years ago, you could definitely say that I was a Sam Harris fan, a huge Sam Harris fan, actually. But I definitely changed my mind over time, and a lot of it had to do with properly engaging with people who disagreed with me on a regular basis, and also establishing friendships with people that I saw as very intelligent, who saw the flaws that I couldn't, and because I already had this a priori respect for them and their ability to reason, I was a lot more open to hearing the criticisms from them. So it's definitely a lot easier to reason yourself out of a position when you establish that there are other people that are more intelligent than you, that are capable of making valid points, that also disagree with you. Because I think that's a big problem on YouTube, is that a big reason why people don't change their minds in general is because they don't see anybody else as their necessarily intellectual superior. They just see it's all as equal intellectual peers, unless you disagree with me substantially enough, in which case you're an idiot. So
a lot of it's just egos clashing. Like if they see like that interview that Sam Harris had with Cenk Uygur, like I felt like a lot of the reactions to the individual points, because you might say like Cenk was wrong about this, Sam was right about this, and in this case I think Sam was more right, and whatever, but throughout it, it's basically like people who hate the Young Turks and they hate Cenk and they love Sam Harris. They're constantly just thinking like, Cenk's stupid. I fucking hate Cenk, like stupid dick. Like, oh, so you made another point trying to challenge Sam, and Sam owned him. I fucking hate Cenk, stupid Cenk, you know. And it's like they're seeing it through that lens. They're not seeing it through like who is making the better point or like who is this idea more valid than like Cenk's last idea wasn't that valid, but this idea was better. They're not seeing it that way. They're just seeing it like fucking challenging Sam Harris, you fucking liar.
Because America, you know what, America, Chomsky made a point about this. America is framed through the lens of competitive sports. He asked himself one day why the hell he cares about whether the Boston Red Sox or the Yankees win a baseball game. This doesn't affect his life. It's not going to get him clean water, shelter, or food. I think that the particularly because we're so insulated here from suffering to an extent, right? Like the American people suffer, but they're so entertained, they're so distracted that they see everything through like my team, your team. Even now, like in reference to postmodernism, what is the American public addicted to in the last decade? Shared universes, grand meta narratives. Every fucking movie is Superman, Iron Man, Spider-Man, and they better all be connected. Yeah. We're so in geek. That's why geek culture got so pissed off at us being postmodern, is because they want every component. They want this like vertical integration that tells themselves a grand story about all this acquired knowledge they have about their geek shit.
Yep.
If I could jump in on that, just again on a politics thing, because I can't really contribute too much to this conversation. But as an American, I voted for the Democratic candidate in every single election I've ever been able to vote in since I was 18. It's never been a question to me. But in the last round of the British Qualitative Election Study of Britain, I wanted to take a question actually from the US primary because there were 17 candidates, and the pollsters were trying to get a sense of how many candidates the Republicans were willing to vote for. So they said, you know, which of these people would you be willing to vote for? Not whom would you vote for? Just pick one. They could pick as many as they wanted. And when I took that to the UK, we asked people about how many parties would you vote for? And what was interesting was that party identification didn't map onto how many parties you would vote for, but it didn't really line up. So if you can think about histograms, there was like one histogram that started at 1 and kind of went to about 4.5, 5, and then one that started at about 2.5 and went over to 7. They kind of overlapped, but if you had a higher partisan identification, you had a lower number. But there were routinely people who would say, I'm a 4 on a 5-point scale of my party identification, but I would vote for the Liberal Democrats, or I would vote for the Greens, or I would vote for the Scottish National Party if I lived in Scotland. And to me as an American, that was just so out of my way of thinking about politics, and it just kind of maps onto a couple of things we've talked about. One is this notion of the public, and what is available to you is what is sort of presented to you, and that shapes your reality. And also this bifurcation, the way that American politics is very competitive and it's winners and losers, and that does then change how people vote and behave. So just wanted to connect some ideas together.
I think us Brits are very cynical. Like, I know a lot of people who said after the Iraq War they would never vote Labour again. Then it looked like the Tories might get in. Everyone was like, yeah, scrap that. I voted Labour to keep these fuckers out. So I think in Britain with voting is about damage limitation.
The party people most likely to say I would vote for to keep this party out are Labour voters saying they would do it to keep out the Tories. I mean, that's just like that's the most populist category of all the partisans. You don't hear conservatives voting Labour out, but you do hear like keep the Tories out. Yes, very true.
Sorry, I was thinking you three in the middle haven't said quite so much. Ted,
but yeah, Gwen, I loved your. Let me tell you, I loved your postmodernism video. It It is at this point, it is the top 3 videos on this whole site. Of all the millions of videos on the subject, yours, Peter Coffin, and I forget the name of the third one because I've had a few beers, but particularly though,
Well, thank you.
it's exceptionally concise. And I think by using, what really compelled me was the extent to which you used Greg's misunderstanding of postmodernism to really fuel where you know, like the corrections were very rich, you know?
Mm. Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. I was thinking of just chiming in here because I remember after the end of the 2016 election, Tim made this video, and I think it was called something like "Democrats to Make Same Mistakes" or something of that nature.
Yeah, do we want to get in that whole?
Yeah. Well, the truth of that title is that as soon as there's this landslide of people criticizing whoever the front runner is on the left or the right of the Democrats or the Republicans, as it is in America. Not that the Democrats are awfully left, but there's a tendency for the other party to just conclude that they've got it made. All that they need to do is stay whatever course they're on. And if they can criticize Obama along the way, that'll be fine for them. If they can criticize Trump along the way, that'll be fine for them. And they don't need to really necessarily improve their situation. That's never the consensus of the party. But there is always a leading faction within the party that does come to that conclusion. And I think you've seen it kind of, you've seen the tension draw very tight with the way that there's some liberal infighting in the Democratic Party right now. Yeah. I think when there was all that discourse about Kamala Harris and her stances on things, she changed them like right after there was all these like leftists and all these people talking about how terrible she was. And then she came out and she said, no, guys, actually, healthcare really is good.
Yeah. I think that she's very similar to Obama in that she will respond to the left if we press hard enough. She will listen. We can press Trump all day long. The people in the Trump administration can't get fucking Trump to behave himself. His own child could be begging, Dad, don't drop nukes on North Korea. He's like, you're fake news. Boom, he blows up North Korea.
Well, even like, you know, really pushy people like Steve Bannon and shit. They couldn't even influence him that much.
He fired, listen to me, he fired, that's like if Bush had fired Karl Rove. He is so hubristic. Yeah. Trump literally fired his brain because he's like, you know, I don't need a brain. I'm all dick. I'm all balls. Let's go to war.
He saw articles that said like President Bannon, and then he just spent months stewing like,
his ego.
President.
Yeah, our entire country right now is wrapped around his ego.
And he was like, Bannon's a great guy, and everyone was like, he's gone. He's gone. Because he was mentioned in a speech. He's going to get fired.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a good thing, in my opinion, that Steve Bannon is gone. You know, the guy was a pretty blatant white nationalist.
Now it's subtle white nationalists. Like, who's that Jewish alt-right guy that's in the administration? That's Stephen. He hates Mexican. He's a bald, creepy-looking guy.
It's hard to keep track of
Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller.
I was going to say, you got to be more specific.
I didn't say it was good. I just said that it was Bannon out. It doesn't mean that the situation is great.
Yeah.
Also, I call gimmick infringement. You are drinking on a live stream. That is my gimmick.
Oh, I'm not drinking. I'm drunk. I mean.
Okay, drunk on a live stream. That's also.
Yeah, there you go. Is anybody else drunk? Come on. Who talks politics sober? Please tell me somebody's smoking weed.
I only just woke up.
I mean, I wish I was smoking weed.
It's a bit early for me.
It's legal in my state now.
I'm not entirely sober. I'll just go on the record. There's a bottle of wine. It's not very full.
God bless you, Dr. Winters. God bless you.
Are you going to link those Kristi, are you going to link those postmodernism videos that you mentioned? I would have watched them today. I will. Lazy playing computer games.
Yep, I can, as prep.
Gaming moments constantly.
Tim didn't do his homework again.
Is that?
Yeah, I can link those. Tim didn't do his homework again.
Yep, I did. Well,
Tim's too busy playing Morrowind.
No, I've been playing Walking Dead. This hangout's getting a bit off topic.
Well, we've been going
Off
since
the rails.
we've been going for 2 hours and 20 minutes now, so we're kind of into
okay.
the completely devolve from the main
Is
theme
it-
into whatever
it-
happens to come up. So I'm having fun. As long as I'm having fun,
Yeah.
I'll keep running the hangout.
Did
It's
you
a
guys,
it's a proper hangout, isn't it? We're getting hangouty.
It's
Did you
Saturday
guys
night
look
for
at
me, or Sunday morning.
Oh, yeah, the first time I met the Bronx blogger was actually on one of my streams where he just kind of I saw him in my chat and I'm like, oh, since this is a subscriber chat, do you want to join?
Yeah,
Your connection is way better then, though.
I thought
what?
I have more than one day job, so like I get a lot of invites, but I can't always show. So like tonight I had a free net and I was like, I can actually show up and do a full hangout, but a lot of the time it's just literally I gotta make money for the bills,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I was wondering if
Does everyone else here? Sorry, go ahead. Does everyone else here have a day job or?
Oh yeah,
me.
yeah.
Yep.
But it's weekend, so I'm off. In terms of the topic, postmodernism, we talked about social justice. We talked about how people kind of get it wrong. We touched a little bit about like how Christians are threatened by it. But do we want to talk at all about like moral questions, or you want to just kind of do YouTube drama or politics or whatever comes up?
How do you mean moral questions? If you could define what you mean.
By which questions?
Moral questions.
Oh, right. Well, in terms of the Christians seem to find postmodernism very threatening because it questions moral assumptions and moral truths. And that's very
Well, it questions
undermining.
It questions their specific moral assumptions and moral, truths. It's not an anti-ethics. It's not against ethics in general, but it's against the idea that there's just some kind of objective morality that a God has given us.
But what about just the idea that, that came forth in Skeptic's video, that postmodernism is kind of like, it's like scary and it's bad, like putting aside what it even is, like there's something about it which is menacing or something, and he does
that's because
sense.
He thinks it's the first cousin to cultural Marxism because he doesn't understand what he's talking about. Cultural Marxism is firstly, it's mostly a crock. But he's in this weird relationship between the center and the alt-right, where like this fish hook is like it's like Gavin McInnes. I did a video where Gavin McInnes had Emily Yukis on. Emily Yukis is a white supremacist. She got him to say 13 of the 14 words that you say when you're declaring the future of your white children. It's basically when you're like declaring war for genocide on Jews and stuff. And the only word he changed was from white to Western. Liberals, center-right liberals, do not understand that just because you fudge the language a little bit. Oh, I'm not into anti-Semitism, but Islam is, what I'm saying? Like Kraut with his thing of like calling out rage after storm. If you just swap the word Jew for Muslim, you got TJ, you got Armored Skeptic, you got Kraut. Every other video on Kraut's channel. 20 years from now, when Muslims are fully integrated into Europe, if Kraut's still alive, they might prosecute him at fucking Nuremberg for the kind of these people are cockroaches rhetoric that he uses against them. It's just mainstream now, like anti-Semitism was.
He might just be like a cranky old man sitting on his porch saying like, God damn foreigners, he says in Europe.
He says sand nigger, dude. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's not even it's not even, you know what I'm saying? Because me and Kraut used to be friendly, even though we disagreed. I know you used to be friendly with Kraut, but I think Armored Skeptic has the same issue of like, I can be anti-Islamophobic. I can get away with Islamophobia at this point because it's mainstream. Well, before the Second World War, anti-Semitism was mainstream until the Jewish people went in the ovens. Now you can't get away with anti-Semitism. You just can't.
But I mean, attitudes towards Muslims is probably a good litmus test for whether you think postmodernism is good or evil, because if you don't believe in any kind of postmodern perspective, you don't believe that there is like any kind of way of like looking at this as less than just a narrative that Muslims are evil and it's bad and be afraid, then then you're less of a postmodernist. If you just see Muslims and think terrorists, evil, bad, 9/11, killing the women, killing the gays, all that kind of stuff, because you've got this like packaged narrative that fits you, and it is like a grand narrative. It's like a way of seeing this entire race of people, or race. So I'm sorry, Islam's not a race, like entire group of people, whatever.
They're not a race.
Whereas
Yeah,
a more
actually,
postmodern perspective would be like that overarching narrative of just Muslims are bad is not satisfactory. So it's quite funny. Like, I'm a skeptic when he's talking about postmodernism, he approaches it from a very non-postmodern perspective, good or bad, because I need this narrative. I need it to be good, or I need it to be bad. Like it has to fit into one of these two categories, you know. And Muslims is like, are they good? Are they evil, or is there actually like, lots of different parts to this group of people that we can analyze and look at in relation to each other and in relation to the world, or evil?
I have a question for Dr. Excuse me. I have a question for Dr. Winters very quickly, Tim. I'm sorry. You live in Germany, Dr. Winters, and a lot of these alt-writers give the impression that these Muslims are showing up and forming like rape. How prevalent is that narrative there, or is that just a bunch of like Western European morons? Like, does the average German have a fear of Muslims?
Well, you know, I work within a circle of friends and colleagues, and I mean, I can tell you that the city's not changed. No, I mean, I don't not go to certain parts of the city at night. It's, you know, I actually looked up some of the statistics about this, because I was thinking about doing a video on this related to the fact that there was a guy who just did a mass shooting of 7 people in Texas, and he, I think, was also killed by the police. So there were 8 dead in this mass shooting, and comparing that to living in Germany. And yeah, there was an influx, or there was an increase in crime, but if you look at it, it's things like bike theft and people riding the underground or the U-Bahn without a ticket, you know, but there hasn't been like a skyrocketing of crimes. And in a city like Cologne, property crime is the most popular crime. Bike theft is, you know, there's cheap bikes around the city. You know why? Because they're probably stolen. But it's cheap to get a bike because there's, you know, so... but no, I haven't seen any change in my quality of life.
When purchasing a bike.
Okay. Well, I know people who spend as much.
Don't tell me. I don't want to be liable if it is.
There are people who spend, you know, 200 euros on a bike and spend 250 in a bike lock, you know, just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere.
So Islamophobia is a fringe belief, then you're telling me, really in Germany in particular?
Yeah.
It's just it's just a bunch of people screeching really loudly.
It is also a narrative, though, isn't it?
We've had an increase of terrorist attacks, but you know there have been 4 of them now in the UK, and they have cracked down on migration. They've been trying to crack down on migration, and yeah, we did have the attack in the Christmas market in one of the bigger cities. Somebody drove through it, but I don't think, you know, Germany hasn't had a massive increase in terrorist attacks because of the up to 1 million refugees who were in a life or death situation. And the other thing too is, you know, there's Merkel's doesn't look to be paying a price. I'm actually going to have a hangout on the German election tomorrow on my channel at 2 o'clock my time here in Germany. But yeah, it looks to be a pretty boring election. So there were some fears about a right-wing rise and, you know, how it was going to go. I'll hear more from the German citizens who'll be joining me tomorrow. But yeah, it's, you know, it's not like the Le Pen election or the Brexit. These are things here. Also, I just want to throw in about Greg. One thing he did say related to Tim point from a while back was he did make a comment in his video about postmodernism taking something and pulling it apart and looking at its individual pieces until it's dead. I don't know if any of you remember that line, but that's what people used to kind of accuse science of doing, that you take a butterfly and you break it apart, or you take a rainbow and you explain it as just light and refraction or whatever. So that just struck me as really sort of hypocritical.
But that's really strange, because like in a video which is mostly just trying to put forth this narrative that there's something inherently wrong with postmodernism, like it sounds like there was this tiny nugget of truth before he went back to bullshit. You know, like, oh, you know, postmodernism picks stuff apart and you know, tries to find the flaws in it, and it's kind of but like skepticism. Anyways, it's bad. It's scary. You know? And he goes back to his bull crap. So it sounds like there was a little nugget of like accidental truth in what it is. Like he actually accidentally said something accurate before saying logic was invented in the Enlightenment. And you're like, fuck. Aristotle
Makes you have something to say about
spinning
that.
in his grave.
Also, you brought up the whole Islamophobia thing earlier, and I want to actually bring up an interesting point that I don't think enough of these like anti-SJWs will bring up. But if you look at the typical depiction of a Muslim, of like a stereotypical Muslim, do you know what kind of racial background they have? They're literally Semitic. They are literally Middle Eastern, you know, from the area where Semites come from. They are Semitic. You know, the people who this also
Why
plays
do
into
you
like
love
people, Palestine,
terrorism?
Israel.
That's my question.
Well, one thing that I don't get is, okay, they're going to say Islam is not a race. Fine, it's a set of ideas. So why are you getting mad at the people instead of talking to them about the ideas?
Well, I
Because
think
all you
they
have to
say
do
keep
is-
going, but they fail at that miserably if you just look at their buttons.
But that's it. I mean, all you have to do is change their minds, because it's just ideas. It's not who they fundamentally are. Like when it was, you know, when it's anti-Semitism, then why aren't they engaging and having those discussions? You know,
It's so
that's
good.
not.
Because it's
They're like-
easier to just blame them for everything being wrong in the world.
They're like, Islam's not a race, but Sam Harris is going to talk about how we shouldn't profile old ladies in wheelchairs in order to stop Islam. It's like, that seems a little bit contradictory. Like,
they're only afraid of brown Muslims. They don't give a fuck about Albanians. They don't give a fuck about those people in the Caucasus Mountains in Russia. It's very much so about. I was going to ask Ted about this. The Pakis thing in London. It seems to be specifically targeted at Muslims from a specific country.
Yeah, like Pakistan, anywhere in the Middle East, North African Muslims, those are the ones who tend to be targeted as like the bad people to stay away from. But when you look at the ones who have a much more lighter tone of skin, you know, the people who would come from a traditionally white background, you know, they're not going to profile them as Muslims, and they don't even actually seem to care about them. I mean, when people think of...
The only time white
Sorry.
Muslims ever come up is when they're using them specifically to say Islam's not a race. It's the only time they ever talk about those people. They're like, oh, look, so there's some white Muslims. Anyways, let's go back to never.
There are a lot of white Muslims in New York, my friend. In New York, we have a lot of Albanian immigrants, and they didn't take half as much shit as when we got in the 1970s. We got a lot of Egyptians when the first coup happened, and we got a lot of Iranians.
No one ever says I got to like Muslims and Islam and everything's a really violent race, and then they show like a race. There we go again. Group, and they show a picture of like white Muslims. Like I've never ever seen that happen.
Yeah, they almost show a picture of a bunch of. It's almost always a picture of like Pakistani or often like Middle Eastern Muslims. I mean,
yeah. And then you say, hey, that seems
East,
a bit racist. And then they're like, well, look at these white Muslims who are very useful for when I want to say Islam's not a race. Look at them. Anyways.
I wanted to really... Sorry. I wanted to ask Ted really quickly. Ted, you're in the UK.
Yeah.
And how close is Tommy Robinson to like the mainstream attitude towards Muslims in your country?
Thankfully, not that close, but not far enough for my liking.
Very good answer. Good answer.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely getting closer, which is scary. Like, a few years ago, you were just considered a racist nut job by everybody. But now more people are starting to listen to him, and no, he's still a racist nut job.
Yeah.
I did notice.
He definitely seems to have become more mainstream. That's creepy.
Piers Morgan.
But you
didn't
gotta
like him.
listen to both sides.
Piers Morgan had that appearance with him where he's like, "You're a racist kook and you're a piece of shit and you're terrible." And everyone was
Yeah,
like, "I
you
hate
know,
Piers Morgan."
You know,
He's
if
such
you
a
had
cuck.
to, like, I mean, like, if people had started saying that to me during the rise of Nazi Germany, I'd be like, "Are you out of your fucking mind? I gotta listen to the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party has said so much shit that's pseudoscientific. This is literally, like, not true and objectively fucking racist. I don't have to listen to both sides because this side is clearly shit." In fact, a lot of people...
Just because we're the Nazi Party, we're racist. Typical.
Yeah.
Oh, come on.
Racist because we don't want Jews running our banks.
People
like,
like,
well,
this doesn't work anymore.
You simply want to get Jews to stop running your banks so that you can run the banks, which, yeah, that is bad because it's essentially saying, well, we don't want other people running the banks, other people who are also citizens of our country and who are very much human beings. We just want to, we want to scapegoat you and say because you own the banks that you're the problem for everybody.
All right, so hey, I'm going to have to step away for a second. So Gwen, will you take over as moderator? And I think you were going to say something, so you can use chair's privilege to make your point and then hand over the mic.
You need to make us all
shut up. Sure. I was just going to say, do you guys reckon that when people advocate for listening to both sides, do you reckon that they like sometimes try chopping vegetables by holding the blade of the knife as well? Because something tells me that there's an obvious practical on the ground disadvantage regarding both sides equally. I think that's a little ridiculous.
I tried that, but I mean, I'm just a bit of a knucklehead. No, actually, I mean, I know this from experience. You can, if you do it right, you can grab a blade and not cut yourself as long as you don't do a slicing motion. But you're not going to cut vegetables with the other side. So you might not get injured but you're not going to get much success if you're trying to chop a zucchini with the knife backwards with the knife handle. Sorry.
I think.
Well, there's not two sides here, are there? There are three sides. Sorry, there's three sides. Isn't that true? There's the left, the right, and the center.
Yeah, the center and the right are pretty much the same on most of these issues, to the point that there's not really a point in saying that they're different things. The center just tries to give an air of not being the right.
It's like mist.
It's like mist. It's
like magic. There's nothing there. It's
mostly semantic, but for the sake of debate, there are supposedly three sides, and I think that complicates this. That we have to climb. Yeah, it's bullshit, but you have to climb over fucking armored skeptic's head in order to get to Richard Spencer. That's what makes this so complicated. Is that the Sargonites are a smokescreen behind which like millennial woes can hide and go. I
mean, Sargon literally millennial woes who is a self-identified reactionary, and self-identified alt-right and white supremacist, and has even said he thinks he's okay with slavery.
Yeah,
I remember that. I remember watching him say that. He says, "Oh, I think I'm pro-slavery," and I was like, "What are you on about?"
Thought experiment.
Are you on glue? Are you huffing glue?
Just a thought experiment, guys.
Use a safer drug, like I don't.
That's what PewDiePie should have said. He should have said that when I said the N-word, it was a thought experiment. In what? I don't know in what, but it just was.
It was a satire, obviously.
It was a satire experiment. It was postmodernism.
It's a social experiment. Oh, sorry.
Hold on. Go ahead, Ted. It's all right. Ted, what were you going to say, bud?
No, I said what I was going to say. Team amplified it for me.
Well, say another thing, because you got another turn. Go. No, 3 more things. That's
I get things, and the time people stop nattering, it's like, oh damn, what was I gonna say? Never mind.
Yeah, we always do that. It's very hard to get a wooden edgewise here.
How many people can count on how many of our like sound bites are going to get chopped out of this by like that little gang of people, and like going to get a bunch of like smug retorts to shit we weren't saying? So like if they're going to cut to like me saying fuck, and then Armor Skeptics is going to be like, he said fuck, did he mean fuck June, you piece of shit, I'll kill you.
It's going to happen.
Well, that's
the Bering supercut.
Yeah,
Well, how about this?
Nothing from the
Bering is an
postmodernism.
I'm just
Nothing
going to
from
say,
the postmodernism bit.
I was going to say right here, Bering is an idiot, and we're going to have a stream debating this tomorrow, probably. He's going to challenge me to a debate because I said that, and then we'll just have a fight again in the stream, and then so that'll be tomorrow,
Honestly,
probably.
the thing is if I were to go on Bering's channel to do a debate, I would not even like pretend that when I'm going to go on that I'm just going to be all nice and pleasant. No, I'm going to immediately be at his throat like I'm a fucking tiger.
Dude, Philip Moriarty ripped his butthole out, bro. It's the most amazing shit I've ever seen. Phil Moriarty was like on some Fight Club, Tyler Durden shit. He was ripping his innards out.
You are literally just creating a Bering video right now. Are you aware of that?
Dude, did you see that video? It was leaked. It's 40 minutes of glory. I had a permanent erection for the entire video.
Tomorrow, I'm going to open up.
I'm now trying to imagine that.
I think Tim was in that hangout, wasn't he? Oh no, did they do one-on-one?
No. One-on-one, it was the last thing Philip Moriarty did, and he crushed Bering's testicles, ate them, cooked them, shit them out.
No, stop. Tomorrow, I'm going to open up YouTube, and there's going to be like there's going to be a picture with your face, Bronx Blogger, being like, and it's going to say like, Bronx Blogger thinks Philip Moriarty.
Let me finish. Let me finish. Let me make more point. Can I make more point, Tim? Can I make more point?
That voice was not bad.
Great.
That sounds exactly like Bering.
Are you kidding me? Yeah, he's like, can I finish my point? Now listen here.
Michael. All right.
But she did consent. She did consent an hour and a half ago.
Did you finish your point?
Is it Rick? Is it Rick?
Yeah.
That was the
Were you
brain
saying you wanted to make another point
That
without intending to make a point?
notion of consent.
But
Yeah.
Bronx never made another point.
what I want to know is, would Bering be more or less likely to say, eschewed a bunch of spastics with me in the hangout?
Good point. Your identity
Look,
politics.
people were asking me, people have asked me over and over, do I hate Bering or have a personal thing? I don't know Bering. I don't have a problem with the person Bering. It's the personality of his channel and like the form of his like channel. And then he's like, but can I defend myself? It's like, look, dude, this is not about you, the person. I have no idea who you are. I just think that your channel is literally to the point where it's not I told this to him in private. The reason that I never did a video on him before he came at me was his channel does not contain politics.
This is just a preview.
It just takes political.
Right here.
No, but dude, he takes political content. And he does what Leafy does, which is like, lets the video talk. He's, oh, you're a cunt. That's the video talk, and he goes, oh, you can kiss my ass. It's like, that is not political commentary. That's taking a political video and chopping it into bits you can insult, and then see you later. Give me a better dice. Give me a better dice.
Well,
You gotta join us with the
I'm just gonna see how he responds in the video he makes about you tomorrow, Bronx, and then we'll catch up. see what it's.
And then
Look, let's hope he doesn't waste time. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and then when Baring tries to make a claim, sometimes I feel like literally his source is that he goes outside, sees a dog turd, and tries to read something in the dog turd. This is my source.
Obviously, SJWs did this. It smells like
So-
shit.
Does he use Breitbart? And yeah, that's literally just a dog turd.
Look again. It's not that It's not that again. I don't want him to like tomorrow go. Bronx blood guy took a shit in my mouth. Look, the point is not.
He could run his.
The point again is not that his channel delete his channel or whatever, but like it's extremely low, thin discourse.
That's the good. But it's
Sorry,
the good
Ted. Go
guy,
ahead, buddy.
bad
What'd you
guy
say?
dialogue.
No.
It's literally, he has nothing intelligent to add to the conversation or nothing thought out. It's just,
Sorry.
I want to insult you. Like, if I don't
say
like you,
You can give Greg that Greg will actually construct humor. You can watch one of Greg's videos and the political substance is garbage, but he will construct jokes with like a setup, a punchline, characters, all that stuff, and then he completely ruins it. It's like he makes like a really beautiful cake, and then inside the cake is broken glass. But like while you're getting through those first layers, it's like, oh, the fondant is so fine, blah, blah, blah. Bam, you get to that center, broken glass.
The video he did to Philip Rose, like
broken class
pretty-
for kids' parties, I'll be fine.
the video to Philip Rose was pretty like meh, whatever overall. But the start was funny when he was like, "What's this? Frozen in ice? Like, oh, it's been here for centuries. What is it?" And then he thaws it out, and he's like, "It's oh my god, it's the liberal ogre. Where has he been all these years?" And I was like, "Okay, that's kind of clever. That's funny." But then the rest of the videos just waffle, like whatever.
Yeah.
But he has fun. He's some funny.
That's why I
setups.
love. Yeah. Sorry, that's what I'm going to say about Ted. Ted is a real comedian. When Ted tells a joke, it's like Coughlin. Ted reminds me of Coughlin's videos.
Yeah.
Even if it's just a very basic video, it contains jokes that have like all the components of a joke.
Hmm.
I'm
jealous of Ted's humor sometimes, to be honest.
Well,
Especially his Facebook jokes, bastard.
but if you speak like this, you need to keep the jokes coming, or the buckets will drop off. I think more YouTubers should have cerebral palsy.
I think,
Yeah, hey, Ted's got timing, buddy. Even Tim has like what was that last video you did that was so creepy that like
White
that
Guilt.
weird Travis Bickle sketch? Yeah, like there's like at least
I didn't know it was creepy.
yeah. Like the beginning of it, I'm like, this is like Taxi Driver. I like this. Like at least Contra has become really great at this. Contra really constructs content, like creates atmosphere, makes creative decisions and stuff like that. And I'd like to see more of that stuff. The worst of them is. Sorry, go ahead, Timmy.
Sorry. I was going to say, just at the start of my video, I watch a Contra video, and that wasn't an accident because, like, I have been inspired by Contra doing those sketches and, like, setting it up like it's actually like a film and shit. And I was like, I want to do something like that. Like a little movie or whatever. It's fun.
I'd love to do something like that, but I don't have nearly the kind of equipment or time that would be required to do that. Or more specifically, I don't have the time with the equipment I have to do something like that, since it takes so long.
I have another idea for a little sketch in a video where I decide that I'm going to criticize Sam Harris, but before I do it, I have to deal with grappling with the fact that the responses are going to be so annoying, and then it's like me fretting, and it's me like, should I do it? God, should I do it?
I think Contra made a great point. Contra made a great point about that of like, we can't just do the same vlogs infinitely or like we'll completely burn out. Like she at one point had a standardized format in the beginning, like the first 10 videos, and she was like, I can't just make the same video over and over. Have you ever seen those videos I do with Sargon's flapping head, that little digital? Like sometimes I'll just switch it up and make it something completely Yeah,
So
like because yeah, I mean any kind of creative thing, it doesn't even take any production value. It's just like a departure from the standard vlog because like it shouldn't just be like the Andy Worski vlog. Andy Worski is sub-bearing. Fucking Andy Worski sits there and goes, oh, and the Chinese guy goes, he's right. He's right. This guy, he's right.
Retarded. Whoa, you fucking retarded.
Oh yeah.
God. Sandy Lasky.
I mean, I try to have some kind of diversity in how I talk about something. I mean, some subjects do open themselves up to like starting with a joke. Like if I'm going to make if I'm like tackling a misogynist, I can immediately like make a joke about how misogynistic this person is. I can say, oh yeah, this person like, oh, why am I subjecting myself to this? It's I haven't seen so much women hatred since I watched that movie that was just.
I mean, there's always variation, is my point, and I think that I think the idea of cringe has become extremely lazy. Hasn't it just become like the little like Andy Worski is the poster boy. Somebody in his own community called him the poster boy. He really is like where you hit rock bottom with this stuff. It's just sitting there going,
I don't know about that because of no bullshit. There's no bullshit now, and he's just super rock bottom.
That's why I started my
bullshit.
channel.
That's
he's
myself.
He's the rock bottomest.
Sorry,
Gwen,
what were you gonna say?
Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say that's why I started my channel because like there are all these people who have like 1 million subs or whatever, and they do like nothing. Like I mean, Contra does a lot of work and deserves what she has, but there are people out there like Andy Worski or whoever who just have a ton of subs and they get all these views in their videos. And I watched a video by somebody. I can't remember who it was, but I remember looking at it and just going, oh, I could do that. I could do that. That's nothing.
Well, certainly the video that I put up, the wrecked pwned anti-feminist, was definitely a send-up of that sort of genre. But of course, the content wasn't, like watching people in bad situations or whatever, or controversial situations. Yeah. It was people getting taken down. It was, actual pwnage. And and the kind of depressing thing is, I got way more views on that than I get on my historical Jesus theory, which I spend a lot of time and work on and research on and pore over and plan out. And so it kind of goes in both directions in terms of what gets.
People love the pwn.
They do love the pwnage. Yeah, Chris Raygun is the next person that people want to see pwned. So compilation is pwnage.
Oh yeah, I would love to. I got material for you.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, you do. I've seen your material. Your material is great. I've used your material. I've used material from other people in this hangout as well.
If only I had the time to do that kind of editing, or actually just had the time to sit through a whole bunch of Chris Raygun videos to find.
Well, this is it, which is what's lovely about my conceit for the series, is that I don't actually have to watch Chris Raygun. I have to watch people respond to Chris Raygun, and that's a lot easier. There's a lot of sugar to make that medicine go down in response videos than just watching hours of pure uncut Chris Raygun heroin.
Yeah, Raygun's videos are mostly just bells and whistles that he stole from iDubbbz and those edge YouTubers, and then he just inserts a bunch of Trump stuff into it. Brittany Venti is another one of these alt-writers that adds a bunch of production value onto just a bunch of garbage. It's not even jokes. When he did that 30-minute bitch fest about Francesca Ramsey raped my mom or whatever the hell that was, that him and Worski and a couple other people talked about how Francesca Ramsey killed all their kids and stuff.
He did decimate their fifis, that's true.
Yeah. Armored Skeptic and Worski's videos were an hour long. I never met anybody in YouTube that I could spend more than 20 minutes disliking, and I did a video about, the American Renaissance, that Jared Taylor guy, and I still couldn't get past 20 minutes. The level of egocentric narcissism you have to literally do this Trump style, everybody's against me, they're all bad, they took my pinky finger and broke it, 45 more minutes of bitching. And then it gets hundreds of thousands of views.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's an hour-long video bitching about one person.
Literally was 15 minutes. That's
I've made videos bitching about Bering and Sargon and stuff, but I don't think I've ever done a semi-documentary about why I hate them. I mean, I did do that one video about just Bering's pattern of harassment, but that's not entirely personal. That's sort of just like, look at what he does on his channel. Like, look at it. That's
yeah, who exactly leaks behind the scene drama like that? Like, they mostly leaked drama that occurred between them and Francesca behind the scenes. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? You tacky loser. Like, why?
19 minutes 23, and it was just about what he does on his channel and why it's bad. It wasn't about like, oh my god.
And it's a public. No, but it's a public problem you have with him. It wasn't an argument you guys had behind scenes that he betrayed you and took your virginity or some shit. Like, that's what bugs me out, is that Francesca Ramsey
betrayed me and took my virginity. Like,
betrayed you and took your virginity.
She popped my cherry and left.
Oh yeah, it's because I'm drunk. That's what it is. I should be drunk during all my videos, like Dr. Layman.
Honestly, it would make your channel even more entertaining than it already is.
What was that, Ted?
I just told the Bronx he's on fire.
Thank you, Ted. No, we should do more hangouts like this. The shitlords do hangouts every single day. That's how they built their brand. We need to do more of these big panel discussions, because this is how we get our ideas out there to counteract would run, you know, like people like Sargon or Fox from the Rest, their channel is all streams. And the reason they did that is, number one, they come up smaller YouTubers, right? And number two, it's like being a 24-hour news network. Every story that happens, Oozaloo, Vero, Sargon, and Kraut are all next to each other laughing at some atrocious thing. You know what I mean? They're already on the air. That gives them power.
Well, we have had consistently like 40 to 45 viewers throughout this stream. So even when it's just gone completely off the rails and we've just gone into just sort of actual casual banter, people are still consuming this. So
45 woke.
Yeah.
Woke jazz.
How long was Sargon's election stream? It must have been 8 hours long. Did anybody else notice that? His election stream was...
I was doing my own.
Probably.
Oh, yeah, I was watching Kristi's the whole time.
Yeah, fortunately we didn't get the results on air. I was really happy to get the results off air.
I also think maybe we should say more like provocative feminist stuff.
More provocative feminist thing. Oh yeah, to give Bearing more content.
To make their minds explode and just create a more...
So I think like the wage gap is a real thing and it can be fixed.
And like
social
police
and
violence
policy.
Against minorities is a problem.
Mind
oh my god, what did he say?
Radical.
He's a cultural Marxist.
Rox Blogger brought up the whole thing about the Hangouts thing and how it elevates smaller channels. I mean, my channel wouldn't have even broken 100 subscribers had it not been for Kevin Logan hosting me on his channel, having Hangouts, giving me the time of day, despite the fact that we only really had a few interactions on Twitter. I mean, I went from having 30 subs to having like almost 100 overnight. Like,
you may
Kevin
only
Logan.
have 600 subs, but they are the 600 best subs on YouTube. That's what I've heard.
They're the 601 best subscribers on YouTube, and one of them happens to be my other account, which I just use to keep track of what
you got lucky in that regard.
like. To keep track of what my channel looks like from the outside and having
you keep that 700,000 garbage whatevers. I've got my 600 fucking alpha geniuses with me.
Tim, subs. I've got my best like 601 alpha males.
Yeah, totally.
Has anybody else noticed that the fucking Kekistan thing is dying a slow, horrible, like writhing death on the internet? Like, I used to get keks every single hour, 20, 30 of them telling them they're going to rape my mother. Bam, my I don't know if it's that I blocked all of them or muted them.
Except Jeff Holiday.
Ever since Sargon got banned.
Keep it alive right now.
I mean, I've noticed that
It's been a lot better since he got banned. I've noticed it. I've remarked on it a couple times, how much better it is and how much less harassment
Jeff
I get.
Holiday blocked me for saying Kyrgyzstan sucks. And he was like, I've had it with your shit, Tim. And he blocked me. And I was like, what? It's a meme.
For that?
Yeah, it's a stupid meme. And now I'm blocked because I said it was bad.
You know what? I tried, Sorry, Ted. Go ahead, bud.
Oh, yeah, it's Jeff going to say you're using me, but having me in.
Oh, yeah, remember that?
I'll be like, well, Jeff,
said,
well, Ted also thinks Kyrgyzstan's bad. And I'm using him, so.
Well, these things go through cycles, don't they? And
so you need to unblock me, you're an ableist.
Crested, and so they're going to find something else to be edgy about next.
Well, Jeff doesn't want to die.
Well, I think it might be Charlottesville as well.
Jeff's like, Kyrgyzstan's the ice cream that's fallen on the ground, and Jeff's like, it's still good. It's still good.
Look, of everybody in here, I probably have had the biggest beef with Jeff Holiday in the past. I didn't press him about this because I don't think he's doing this in bad faith. I think that he believes that Kyrgyzstan is a thing that can be independent.
He's a true believer. Yep.
Yeah, so I didn't press him on it. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm letting him go through his process, and you know what I'm saying. It'll go.
I have low.
I don't want to. There are a lot of people that I don't like, and I want to rub their face in dog shit, and I don't want to rub Jeff's face in dog shit. He's conciliatory enough. You know what I mean?
I thought I think like maybe it's low social intelligence. It wasn't me reading the room, but I couldn't conceive that this pathetically stupid meme called Kyrgyzstan, which is a lot of racist imagery that is not particularly challenging to white supremacists, and a lot of white supremacists have now used in their profiles and appropriated, and it's not funny and never really was funny, and is fucking lame and is pathetic and sucks. I had no idea that me criticizing that would cause him to have a tantrum and block me because I thought he was an adult. That's all. So it was shocking.
It's
what the fuck?
It seems like it's a tender spot, like.
Yeah, it's like it's tender. It's like, oh my god, fuck your feelings, but don't ever say anything mean about my meme.
No, I mean, I get it. Look, man, they are in a political movement that was built around Sargon and Kyrgyzstan, and all that's just collapsing. And a lot of these channels don't know how to rebrand. They don't know where they're going to go. Where do you go when Sargon can't start beef on Twitter? Sorry.
This World of Warcraft meme has completely died, so now we have to find something else to rebrand ourselves as.
Yeah.
But think about it. We're actually going to get to confront the alt-right. As Kyrgyzstan falls away, we're going to actually be able to hit the alt-right on the face. Because they're in the streets, we can now go back to proper right-wingers and not, liberalism betrayed me. We can bang on the heads of people like Millennial Woes and Baked Alaska. Tim did that bit on Baked Alaska. Or was that more milk?
Milk!
Yeah.
My milk! Yeah.
Metaphorically, like sort of verbally ponage, crack them on the head.
But I think like
For legal
the
purposes,
centrists, whatever skeptic people have done a great disservice by basically trying to deracialize the imagery that the racists use. So Kyrgyzstan has actually been a great help to them because it's kind of sanitized. It's like they're trying to re-sanitize Pepe, and they're trying to take back racist imagery, but it's not going to prevent the alt-right from continually using that stuff. It just means that they'll be able to point to like, oh, it's not racist anymore. Look what the skeptics are doing. Kyrgyzstan's not racist anymore. It's fine. Anyways, let's have a fucking ethno state, and Jews will not replace
Charlottesville killed the center. Charlottesville showed to the American. Sorry, Timmy, for interrupting you, but Charlottesville showed the American public that you're with Nazis or you're not. Bam. That's the end of that centrist conversation. That's dead in the water.
Yeah, and now it's still good. It's still good. Oh no, don't let it go. Don't let it go.
See, I don't want to laugh. I don't want to laugh because, I don't want to laugh because these guys made their livelihood off of this stuff. You know what I'm saying?
I don't have to
I'm not playing devil's advocate.
Seriously. I don't have to legitimize that stupid meme, even if it hurts their feelings. I'm sorry. I mean, you're an alright guy, but I don't respect your stupid meme. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that.
So, Gwen, do you have any thoughts on this? because you've been quiet for a bit, but I'm interested.
No, I totally agree with what Bronx is saying about how Charlottesville killed more or less the center. I think it at least killed the golden mean fallacy, the appeal that both sides are equally as bad. We need to go to the middle, because I mean it's very clear that when it comes to issues of fascism, if the two sides that you're going with are fascists and everybody else, it's not a matter of weighing both sides equally and finding something in the middle, because that's just going to capitulate to moving the Overton window, whether or not you want to use that term, to the far right. And there's a degree to which that's extremely harmful to political discourse. So.
I certainly found myself, sorry, I'm just going to interject quickly. I found myself retweeting a lot of Republicans right after Charlottesville about there aren't two sides here. There's, there are two sides, right and wrong. That's it.
Yeah.
And
well, Kristi, did you notice?
But I live in an echo chamber.
Did you notice,
Sorry,
Kristi, after it's okay. Did you notice after 800 videos, Sargon finally did a video called "Nazis Are Bad"? Did you see this?
Whoa!
I heard that it was sort of mistitled because it was really more about something else, whining about liberals or something. But you had.
He read Ayn Rand.
Ayn Rand.
He read Atlas Shrugged, and halfway through, I swear to God, halfway through Atlas Shrugged, he looks up at the camera and goes, "Nazis bad."
What?
It's the best shit ever. I'll link you in the group chat. Holy shit. He must have been 40 pages into Atlas Shrugged. He looks up with that goony look on his face and he goes, "You know what? Nazis bad." I was like, holy shit.
I'm sure
Shouldn't even bother putting R in there.
I'm sure Thomas Smith would be interested in that. And
not good. Not good. Very, very bad.
I just can't even.
That was his 803rd video. It took Sargon 800 videos to realize Nazis are bad. God bless his little soul.
Well, you know what? His argument that Nazis are bad was an appeal to authority. It was Nazis are bad because Ayn Rand says so. It wasn't even his personal opinion. It was just like, look, Ayn Rand said it's bad, and I like Ayn Rand, so they must be bad. Derp.
I honestly think he kind of does with the white supremacists, which is what Trump does, which is give them some space and some, credibility and dog whistles, and then occasionally disavow them, but not really mean.
Well,
when it gets too much pressure.
It had to be an Ayn Rand book because he had to denounce them from the right, or Patreon would be fucked. That's what it was to me. I'm like, Ayn Rand, Nazi bad? Ayn Rand loves fucking Nazis. Are you kidding me?
Was she Jewish? I can't remember. I'll have to look that up.
Is it not true? Atlas Shrugged is about a bunch of rich Nazis. It's about private tyranny versus public tyranny. So yeah, let's let private fascism.
She was the daughter
override
of non-observant Jews, apparently. So she had this I guess.
Well, just the fact that a classical liberal would read Ayn Rand, to show how he's not at all completely on the right, even though that's the same book that inspired Paul Ryan. So.
You know what I just realized?
Also, you can...
sorry, what was that?
And looking up and going, "Oh, Nazis are bad." I'm pretty sure there's literally a Davis Orini video like that. I think you just have to find it.
I googled Nazis.
Oh man,
bad. All right.
Oh
Not
yeah,
good.
yeah.
I finally know what a Nazi is, and I think they are bad.
The line between sort of hangout and after hangout chat has really blurred here, and so just for those of you who are viewing, if you
And I
really
thought
know
I
what
should go get a
happens
coffee
off
anyway.
air, yeah, this is kind of what happens when we go off air. This kind of chat.
Okay. Anyways, what's our How about we just go around the circle and we see postmodernism good or bad? I say postmodernism good. What do you say, American anarchist?
Atheist. No, I'm Wiccan.
Slash anarchist.
Okay. Sorry, give me a second to recover. Okay.
Postmodernism
Yay.
good or bad? Good.
Yay.
We got good. We got good.
Yay, not bad. Yay.
When?
It's
Good. Bad.
It's okay. It's useful.
Okay, you can't have okay.
I would
It's for good or bad.
I want
Move on.
Tim, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, and I'm going to say I'm neutral with postmodernism.
Oh God, so you're a postmodernist? That's bad.
I'm neutral. I'm neutral.
We live in a binary world of good or bad. That's the only thing that is allowed. Kristi, good or bad?
Well, when we look at the concept of good,
Ah,
and,
fuck. I'm changing my answer to bad. Postmodernism is bad.
oh, that's a good bit. That should be the opening bit of the hangout.
Well, Kristi said that you should chop it into chunks to make it easier to watch or something.
Yes, less than 4 hours long.
Sargon long. We gotta chop it down to chunks that just make it one Sargon long so that Sargon can watch this.
You should do a segment of like Bronx blogger goes house on bearing. Lots of exclamation points times 17.
Pwned, wrecked, anus removed.
Yeah, Bronx blogger, chairs bearing down.
In the bearing voice. In the bearing voice.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
Can I finish using my anus? Can I finish using my anus? Can I finish?
Can I finish before you rip it out, Mike?
Hold on, Ted.
I've never heard him say name. Before you rip it out.
Postmodernism good or bad, Ted?
I say, better than Nazis, definitely.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
Good.
I say can I go and chopping beans?
Okay, Ted thinks postmodernism is good. He's on the record.
Well, better than Nazis.
I would say that postmodernism.
Hi, Ted.
I would say that postmodernism is the building block of progress. I think in order to move forward as a society and challenge fascism, we need to crush. Yeah, we need to crush these grand narratives, because these narratives of the Roman fascists, these narratives of the German Nazis, these ideas that every event in history has led to the basement where Millennial Woes is talking to you is dangerous.
Please summarize
You know
in
what I'm
half a
saying?
sentence or less, though.
Sargon, if you're listening, Sargon, Nazis, bad.
Nazis, bad.
We can all agree
Nazis bad.
Because Ayn Rand, so we'll agree.
Postmodernism good, Nazis bad.
There we go.
Ayn Rand, right, Nazis bad. And hangout.
So it sounds like it's the end of the hangout.
Yeah.
Hangout, good hangout.
All right, so there are still
We got to do it again.
And
Yeah, it was a great hangout. We should do it again. I think this is good for the community.
Interacting.
Also, check out my hangout this Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Peter Coffin. We are going to be talking about Antifa.
oh,
Antifa!
Good.
Just
And
a
that's-
cheap little plug.
yeah, everyone want to do a plug? Tim, you just did a video, Walking Dead video.
That doesn't need plugging. That's just me playing. I decided to play through the 3rd season of The Walking Dead, and nobody watches it. But I just was like, I've committed, so I have to finish it at some point. So
Can I shout that out? Because no, I just watched it. I found it tonight when I was kind of waiting to kill time before we went on air, because we didn't start till 11 o'clock in the evening my time. And you're really funny. Like I don't want to give away any of the jokes, but there's some really good jokes in the first episode. So.
gaming moments.
And I would recommend everyone go and watch. Not suitable for work, but yeah, go watch.
If you don't
Tim's
mind just
gaming videos.
endless anti-Semitism, you'll love it.
No, it's not.
That's not my games do that to you. It's not my fault.
Oh, that's right. That's right. The slurs just come out.
Exactly.
They're all heated gaming moments.
It's heated. So.
And yeah, and Ted, you have a holiday-related video that you just released.
Asshole. Like, Stalin learned nothing wrong. Never mind,
So-
communist joke. You might not get it.
Okay.
It's like
You're
food.
not dead.
It's like food. You might not get it.
I do my weekly Q&A every Saturday. This week, you asked me what my favorite holiday was, and if you want to see the answer, you have to go to my channel. Ah.
That's good.
Gwen, how about you? What's
This channel is funny, so.
What?
Oh, I got a Paul Joseph Watson video that I'm doing soon. Trying to loosely conform to the style of some Sean and Jen videos that I like quite a bit. I should actually say Sean because it really is just Sean. But no, I like his PJW responses that he's done, and I'm doing one like that about George Orwell and Antifa because I thought it would be great.
Good.
Yeah.
Am I the only one who missed why it became Sean? Like, I just remember it all of a sudden instead of Sean and Jen just being Sean.
There was no Jen.
It was a Let's Play channel, and Jen and Sean used to do Let's Play on there, and then they went to Twitch. So now Sean does political commentary on YouTube, and then Sean and Jen mostly do live streams on Twitch or on their second YouTube channel.
That's because Jen doesn't do a lot of the political content, so Sean's views were being attributed to her, I think.
Yeah, every one of these loser MRAs goes, are you even sleeping with Jen, loser? Are you even sleeping with her? Like, Jesus Christ, she's a lesbian.
So
Jesus.
Just wants to take her name out so she's not getting given shit for like stuff he does.
So I was just wondering, like, what the backstory was behind that. I probably could have asked that when we went off air.
She does exist.
So yeah, Gwen,
right.
the first, I mean, definitely imitation is how I started off in YouTube, and I still get people's influences, like, with ContraPoints that we talked about earlier. So yeah, doing something that you like and admire, that's a great way to go in terms of video making. Yeah. And then we got the Bronx Blogger. What have you recently released? You just put something up last day or two.
My latest video is called Cartman's Law, and it is about it's about the South Park reaction to the Tiki Torch March is that the Confederates are embarrassing white liberals, and the poor white liberals, we have to bear the burden of these rednecks waving the Confederate flag. The fact that they have a black family on the show and a Jewish family on the show and didn't respond at all to, like, those characters don't even appear on screen or speak, shows how shitty and useless South Park is in this political climate. They were fighting against Bush because it was like a liberal conservative thing. We are no longer in that era. We are in a reactionary versus radical era. You either are a radical or a reactionary. You can't send a liberal against a reactionary. It's not strong enough.
So
sorry,
go
that's
check
my
out
list.
that.
Here, my list with it.
Liberals!
Liberals, shakes fist. In fact, I can briefly to show my fist shaking.
Yeah, you were kind of cutting out there.
I didn't hear that, bud. What'd you say?
Oh.
Right.
What?
Yeah.
Cutting out while talking. I said liberals, shakes fist, and then turned on the camera briefly to shake my fist at the camera.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it was. It's my red and black fist going up in the air saying, "No South Park!"
All right, guys. Well, you guys in the Hangout don't go anywhere because we might still have some off-air chat. But for those of you who are watching, thanks for sticking with us for as long as you've been here. And also, to plug my own channel, I've just put up another video about the historical Jesus, this time looking at non-canonical text and views about his body and nature and the theological debates outside of the canon. So go check that out if that sounds nerdy and somewhat intriguing. And otherwise, all that's left to be said is that I've been Kristi, you've been awesome, goodbye from me, and also goodbye from everyone in the Hangout. Everyone in the Hangout, say goodbye.
Bye.
All right, I got it right this time. Yay!